Welcome to the Windows 95 Traincast, the show designed to prepare you for the move to Windows 95. On today's show, we'll take you step by step through the rollout planning process and the technical requirements for migrating to Windows 95. We'll walk you through the setup process, then explain in detail the boot process using the troubleshooting tools built into Windows 95. Finally, we'll cover how to do common administrative tasks using the new user interface. Our host for today's show is well known in the computer training profession. Elliot Mazie is president of the Mazie Center. He has authored 12 books, including the popular Computer Training Handbook by Lakewood Publications. Windows 95 Traincast is sponsored in part by Dell Computer Corporation. Now live from the Microsoft campus in Redmond, Washington, Elliot Mazie.
Hello, I'm Elliot Mazie, and I would like to welcome you to the third in a series of shows focused on preparing IS professionals for Windows 95, the next major release of Windows from the Personal Systems Division at Microsoft. It is an integrated and complete operating system designed to make PCs easier to use, faster, and more powerful. Windows 95 will change the industry and the way people use PCs in a way that no other operating system release ever has. Simply, it will redefine current operating systems as we know them. The past two Traincast shows focused on why migrating to Windows 95 makes good business sense. The next 6 shows, starting today, focus on preparing IS professionals for Windows 95 by providing a unique technical inside look. As a training professional and your guide on this journey, I want to help you understand Windows 95 as both a technical and enterprise product. IS managers and support professionals are on the very front lines of deploying Windows 95. Your preparation and knowledge of this product is a key to a successful migration. Never before has Microsoft provided so many resources on a specific product. Consider today's show as a visual and auditory training manual. However, there are many other tools available to extend and reinforce your knowledge of Windows 95. I encourage you to take advantage of any or all of these learning materials. The Windows 95 Reviewer's Guide details information about Windows 95 features and functionality. Win News is a newsletter that details the current status of Windows 95 and provides information about upcoming events as Windows 95 nears completion. The Gartner Group report is a study on the cost of migrating to Windows 95 and the eventual savings to your organization. The Windows 95 Resource Kit is being developed with the IS manager in mind. Emphasis will be on the technical details behind the software. The book, Inside Windows 95, describes the architecture and how it works. Traincast and other Microsoft TV broadcasts, like the show you are seeing right now, provide easy access to timely information directly from industry experts. Microsoft authorized technical education centers can also provide certified training courses on Windows 95. Many of these education centers are hosting today's show. Finally, the Mazie Center offers 2 products to further your education. By subscribing to Windows 95-training on the internet, you will receive ongoing information, resources, and tips on a variety of Windows 95 training and learning strategies. The Managing Windows 95 Learning Kit is a briefing in the box to keep corporate end users and management up to date on learning strategies for Windows 95. Later on, we will tell you how and where you can get these products, so be sure to have something available to take some notes. Today's show is scheduled to run 4 hours. We are happy to have Johnny Lindsey, who is responsible for training Microsoft support engineers on Windows 95, to take us through an in-depth and technical look at the Windows 95 installation process. As you heard earlier, we have 4 sections to present to you today. Following each section, we'll take a couple of minutes to answer live questions. Microsoft has a team of Windows 95 engineers standing by right now to answer your questions, so feel free to call anytime during our show for your questions. Call 206-635-7066. Some of those questions will be selected to be answered live on the air. Now, one more thing before Johnny gets started. We're having a terrific contest during the next 6 shows During each Traincast, we're going to ask you to call a special phone number to answer a question that relates to the topic of each show. Then, sometime during the show, the first 100 callers who give us the correct answer to our question will receive a copy of Microsoft Encarta. Everyone that calls will have their name entered into a grand prize drawing for a chance to win a new multimedia computer system provided by Dell Corporation. This winner of this system will be announced at the end of our last show, but here's a catch. In order to win, you must be watching. Now, let's get started. It is important for the IS manager to properly plan the migration to Windows 95. In focus groups, Microsoft asked hundreds of IS professionals what would be the best rollout planning process. In this first section, Johnny will present you the steps they recommended. Johnny?
Thank you, Elliot. It's important for you as an IS manager to properly plan the migration to Windows 95. In this first segment of our show, we're going to look at the details of how you can get to Windows 95 through a 6-step process. This is basically detailed in the deployment guide for Windows 95. The deployment guide is found in the Windows 95 resource kit. And this details information on how to plan your migration. In this first segment, I'm going to cover the technical details of this process and discuss some of the information you may need while going through these 6 steps. Basically, we're going to involve the first step, which would be reviewing the product. Here is where you're going to learn as much as you can about Windows 95. This is important for you to be able to understand the installation process as well as to be able to support the product and support your users as best you can. The second step will be to inventory the hardware and software needs. When inventory hardware software needs, we're looking for you to gather as much information about the hardware that you'll be installing Windows 95 upon. We'll also want to know the software needs that you have. You'll make a list of what software is commonly used within your organization so that you'll be able to test with these. The third step will be to select the preferred client configuration. And what we mean here is actually determining what's the best client for your Windows 95 workstations. What's the fastest and most compatible client you can use? And we'll discuss some of the options and testing that you can do to determine this. The fourth step will actually be to test this configuration. You now know your hardware, you know your software, and you know what clients to use. Let's put them all together into a testing lab and get that working. The fifth step will be to create a plan for implementation. And here's where you'll actually detail how you'll roll this out to your organization. Based on the above steps, you've done your testing, you found out your hardware and software needs and your preferred client, and now you want to detail how you're going to put this onto your Windows 95 workstations. And finally, the sixth step is the performing of the installation. And here we'll give you tips and tricks on how to install to the server and the best ways to install to your clients. The first step towards a successful migration to Windows 95 is for you, the IS manager, to learn the technical details of how Windows 95 works. Basically, you'll get under the hood to determine what really happens with Windows 95. There's been a great deal of interest in Windows 95 publicly, and there are a number of resources available to you. We're going to detail a number of these resources that are available from Microsoft later in this show. But it is important for you to begin to understand the product. This is for both while you're installing Windows 95 so that you can have a smooth and successful migration, as well as to be able to properly support your users once Windows 95 has been installed. Once you've reviewed the product and learned more about it, the second step is to determine the different types of hardware and software that will be used in your organization. And then you'll want to compare this to what is needed for Windows 95. Once you have completed this inventory, you will construct a test lab based on this, then you'll be able to determine any incompatibilities or problems that you may run across. Windows 95 has a number of hardware requirements that we're going to detail to you now. The first is the processor. You need to have at least a 386 processor or better. This really shouldn't be a problem with most organizations, as 386 is pretty much a standard across businesses nowadays. The second requirement is 4 megabytes of memory. The 4 megabytes is a minimum requirement, and Microsoft actually recommends you have at least 8 megabytes of RAM. However, please note that a 386 4 megabyte machine will run just as fast under Windows 95 as it did under Windows 3.1. The third requirement is for your video to be at least VGA at a minimum. We also recommend that you use Super VGA. This recommendation is based on the fact that There are a number of features and applications that take advantage of the higher resolution of many video cards. This includes things like video for Windows, which is built into Windows 95. Another requirement that you'll want to consider is disk space. Windows 95 requires at least 40 megabytes of free disk space for a typical install over Windows 3.1. Again, 40 megabytes, keep in mind, that may sound like a great number at this point in time. However, that also includes the existing Windows 3.1 installation. For a server-based setup, you'll want to have at least 90 megabytes of free disk space on your server. However, but please note on your workstation, you'll only need about 1 megabyte, give or take a few megabytes for your swap file. And of course, if you have a diskless workstation, or maybe doing some remote booting, you will not need any disk space at all on that workstation. As far as the software that's going to be required, Windows 95 will need an existing operating system. First, you can have MS-DOS version 3.2 or higher. If you have an OEM version, don't worry, because as long as it's compatible with DOS 3.2, there's not a problem. If you also have an existing installation of Windows 3.0 or Windows 3.1, you can also upgrade on top of that. Or if you have Windows for Workgroups 3.1 or 3.11, you'll also be able to upgrade over that operating system as well. If you have a workstation with OS 2 installed, you will be able to dual boot between OS 2 and Windows 95. The requirement for this is that you have an MS-DOS FAT partition installed on the OS 2 machine. If you happen to have a Windows NT machine, you'll also be able to dual boot between Windows NT and Windows 95. Again, the requirement is that we have an MS-DOS FAT partition on the NT machine that we can install Windows 95 to. Based on this inventory that you've done, you'll want to determine if you need to upgrade any of your hardware. And you should determine the cost and the time involved to upgrade any of these machines and add this to your planning guide. Windows 95, however, will be compatible with most of your existing hardware, as a 386 with 4 megabytes of RAM has become fairly commonplace in businesses today. Once you have done this, you can begin to construct a test lab. Here, this should contain all of the possible hardware and software combinations that you will have. This is a very important step to migration, and this testing process will help you to forecast any potential problems and concerns you may have with setup and with your users using their applications on Windows 95. Here we have an example of our test lab in our studios. This has been provided to us by Dell Computer Corporation. We have two different types of servers, a Novell NetWare server and a Windows NT server. This is also becoming much more commonplace in businesses today to have multiple servers. We also have 3 different client machines. We have 2 desktops as well as a laptop machine. Laptops, again, have become more and more useful in businesses today, combining them with a docking station. So we'll talk a little bit about how a laptop can be used in your organization. The first desktop we have is a Dell Pentium and is currently running Windows for Workgroups 3.11. The other desktop is a 486, and I've already installed Windows 95 on this machine so that we can show you some of the highlights of Windows 95. The laptop we have is a Dell Latitude 486, and this also has Windows 95 already installed. It'll be running Office from the NT server. Again, this is just a sampling of the different hardware that may exist in a typical business. Your test lab may differ from what we have here. You may have more hardware, different types of machines, different types of devices. You also may have fewer. You may only have one type of machine throughout your organization, and so you only need to test with one machine in your testing lab. Again, determine your needs here and determine what hardware you'll want to test with. The third step in our migration process should be to determine the network configuration that will be used by your client workstations. Now, the optimal client will take advantage of the protected mode 32-bit architecture provided by Windows 95. Windows 95 provides 32-bit clients, protocols, and network adapter drivers. However, if necessary, you can continue to run your existing Windows 3.1 network clients as well. Windows 95 will offer 2 protected mode clients. The first is the client for Microsoft networks. This will allow you to connect to any Microsoft SMB-based server. These would typically be your Windows NT servers, perhaps a Windows for Workgroups server or a Microsoft LAN Manager server, as well as Microsoft add-on for MS-DOS. The second client is the client for NetWare networks, and this is the client that will replace your real mode IPX or your real mode IPX ODI configuration. This again will allow you to connect to any Novell NetWare server or a compatible server such as the Windows 95 file and print sharing for NetWare networks. At this point in time, I'm going to show you how you would add a protected mode client onto one of our workstations. We're going to go to the Dell 486 machine, and here from the Dell I'm going to move to My Computer. Within the My Computer screen you're going to see an option for Control Panel. And once in Control Panel, I move quickly to the network icon. Double click on that. Here you see currently we have the client for Microsoft Networks installed. And what I'm going to do is choose Add, because I want to add a new client, and then select Client and Add again. You'll see here there are a number of manufacturers listed, including Artisoft, Banyan, Beam & Whiteside, Novell, Sun Select. Each one of these is a 16-bit client. The 32-bit clients are going to be provided under the Microsoft manufacturer. And you'll see we have three listed here. The two protected mode ones, client for Microsoft and client for NetWare networks, are listed here as well. I'll select client for NetWare and choose OK. At this point it's been added to my configuration now. You'll see that on the screen. And I'll choose OK. Windows 95 will then look for the files to copy to support the client for NetWare networks. And I'll point it to the correct server. In this case, I'm pointing to my NT server. And the correct subdirectory on the NT server. And it pulls the files down to my local workstation. Again, what we're doing here is we're adding the client for NetWare, and this will give me access to both now my NT machine and my network machine as soon as we reboot the machine. And you also see a progress bar as it copies the files down necessary for the client. Keep in mind, this client is actually a replacement for any real mode client. If necessary, Windows 95 will remark out those lines in your AutoExec or your other batch file that loads your real mode NetWare client. At this point it asks me if I want to restart, and I will go ahead and restart the machine by choosing yes. At this point, Windows 95 asks me to log into the Microsoft network. Now this would be my NT server, so I'll go ahead and log in there. It tells me that was successful. Once it finishes loading Windows 95, I'll then be able to connect to both the Microsoft network, in this case the Windows NT server, as well as the Novell NetWare server. And you'll see Office is also loading from the NT server. At this point, I'll move over to Control Panel and into Network Neighborhood. And what the Network Neighborhood will do here is it's searching currently for any computers out there on my network. It'll search for the NT servers, and now that I've added the client for NetWare networks, it's also going to search for any Novell NetWare servers. And at this point you see I have three different servers located on my machine. First I have the NT server, which is the Windows NT server. I have the Novell NetWare server. In this case we called it train_NW312. And I also have a Traincast 1 server. And that's my other Windows 95 machine. So when I double click on Train, my NetWare server, you'll see I can see any shared devices that are located on there. You can see it's quickly I'm able to connect to my client for NetWare networks now. There are a number of benefits to the 32-bit protected mode network clients over their real mode counterparts. The first benefit is that it uses no real mode memory. This is going to be a terrific benefit for those of you who use a number of MS-DOS-based applications. You know the problems of having to always find conventional memory. Well now, since we're using fully protected mode clients, you don't have to worry about that. They won't reside in conventional memory at all. The second benefit is that it's much, much faster. These clients benefit from what we call client-side caching. It also benefits from a 32-bit architecture, not ever having to go down to real mode in order to access your network. They're also going to be much more stable because they were written for a multitasking 32-bit environment. Another benefit is that you can have multiple redirectors. In this case, in our demonstration, you've seen we had two redirectors installed, the client for NetWare and the client for Microsoft networks. I could add as many 32-bit network providers as is available. At this point in time, you can also add one 16-bit real mode redirector. Another benefit of the Windows 95 32-bit protected mode clients is that they have a common user interface across all networks. Now that you can have multiple networks, you'll also be able to have a common interface to access those networks. This benefit will be seen mostly by your users as they're accessing their different servers on your network. Here, I'm going to show you an example of demonstrating that. And what I'll do is I'll move into the network neighborhood and double click on that. You'll see that all three of them actually look similar, and you would access them all three the same way. You would double click on them. I'll double click on the NT server, and you can see how I've actually accessed all of the shares and a shared printer on the NT server. Now if I back up to my original network neighborhood, I could double click on the NetWare server, and again you see shares and printers the same way. So you have a common user interface to get to two different types of servers. For those of you who have used Windows 3.1 with multiple networks, you'll see this can be a very big benefit for that. No longer will you need to access both a NetWare server with a different dialog box than you would with your NT servers. So you can see how this would be easier for your users. The next benefit that's available is a 32-bit protected mode network protocol. Windows 95 will ship with three popular protocols that are used within the corporate environment. The first is NetBEUI, and this is used among small local area networks. It's very fast and very efficient within these type of networks, and those of you who are used to using Microsoft networks may be familiar with NetBEUI. The next protocol we have is the IPX-SPX compatible transport. Now this is the protocol that gives you access to your Novell servers. And actually you can use this to talk to other Windows 95 and Windows NT machines as well. The third protocol we provide is TCP/IP. And the TCP/IP protocol is used on large-scale LANs and WANs, any local area network or wide area network. Many of you may already be using a version of TCP/IP, and this will replace that. And it should be much faster and easier to use for you. At this point in time, I'm going to demo installing TCP/IP on the 486 machine. What I'll do here is actually go into my computer again by double-clicking on that. And I'll choose Control Panel again. Again, the protocols will be installed as the same place as the clients, so I'll choose double-click on the network icon. You'll see we have both the client for Microsoft networks and the client for NetWare networks. That's what we just added in. The protocols we have installed currently are the IPX-SPX compatible protocol and NetBEUI. So I want to add TCP/IP. I'll choose Add, and I will choose Protocol and choose Add again. Again, you'll see a number of manufacturers listed here and their specific protocols. For example, we have Digital Equipment's protocols listed. We have Banyan's protocols listed. The Microsoft protocols are listed under Microsoft. And on this list here, I'll select TCP/IP at the bottom. Choose OK. Windows 95 quickly installs the TCP/IP protocol, and I can choose OK again. At this point, it's going to copy the files necessary for TCP/IP, and I'll point it to the correct directory. And actually, since I've already pointed to this directory before, one of the things I can do is click this down arrow and select this directory I already had, and choose OK. Again, a progress bar will indicate what it's doing is it's copying files from the NT server. And again, these are files necessary for TCP/IP. Once these files are copied, I'll then be asked once again to reboot the machine in order that I'll be able to come back up with TCP/IP installed. And it leaves me with a final prompt. Do you want to restart your computer now? I'll go ahead and say yes. Windows 95 is going to make its changes. At this point, we now have TCP/IP installed on our computer, and now we're going to actually log into the network once again. And we'll log into our Microsoft network domain. It tells me that was successful. Windows 95 will bring up the user interface, and now I have TCP/IP installed and can use the TCP/IP protocol to communicate to my other servers that also have TCP/IP installed. There are again a number of benefits to the 32-bit protected mode network protocols over a real mode protocol. The first is, again, they'll be faster, much faster. These use 32-bit code, and again, no mode switching is required. We don't have to drop down to real mode on your machine in order to be able to use this protocol. And actually, some of the other enhancements we've made to the protocols has quickly increased the speed. Testing has shown that our IPX protocol is over 300% faster than a real mode IPX protocol. We also have stability with these protocols. We never have to leave the protected mode environment to talk to the network, and this means it's much more stable. Finally, we have to use no real mode memory, and again, this is a benefit if you're using MS-DOS based applications. Again, no real mode memory, that saves you between 30 and 40K of memory per protocol. And finally, it's actually going to be easy to configure. The Windows interface actually makes it much easier to configure a protocol that actually can be quite complex, like TCP/IP. Again, I'm going to demo configuring TCP/IP for you on the 486 machine. Again, I'll go into My Computer and Control Panel and to the network icon. Again, we'll see that common network screen that we've seen in the past. And I'll highlight TCP/IP and choose the Properties button this time. And you'll notice there's some very simple configuration screens. The defaults actually allow me to use a DHCP server. This is a server on the Windows NT machine that automatically configures my IP address. So it makes it much easier for the user not having to know IP addresses or WIN configurations or gateways. Each of these screens allows a very quick, simple selecting of a process, typing in a number if necessary. At this point, I'll go ahead and set it back to using DHCP and choose OK. Choose OK once again. Any configuration changes that I made automatically take effect. Again, Windows 95 will support older real mode protocols, such as real mode IPX and IPX ODI, or any Indus 2.0 protocols. These again are for backwards compatibility. For example, if we did not have a protocol within Windows 95 that you would like to use, you could certainly use that within the Windows 95 environment. The final decision you want to make is whether or not you can use a 32-bit protected mode network adapter driver. Here we have many network adapter drivers, and again I'll show you this in the control panel network screen. Here on the 486 machine we have control panel already up and running, so I'll just double click on networks. This time we'll choose add once again. Rather than client or protocol, I'll choose adapter and choose add. And again, if I scroll through the list of manufacturers, you'll see there's any number of the popular and even some of the less popular manufacturers listed here. You'll see a number of net cards listed, model numbers for any one of these network adapters. I'll install a common network adapter that perhaps you use on your networks. Under a Novell Anthem, the NE2000 or a compatible adapter. Choose OK. Choose OK once again. Now ask me for my configuration for my adapter. It also lets me know if there's any type of conflict with the current settings that I have. In this case, my interrupt is set to 5. My IO address is set to 340, excuse me, and then I'll choose OK. And it'll make that configuration, load the appropriate drivers, and I'll point it to the NT server. Once it's finished copying through the progress bar, copying files needed for that particular card, it will once again ask me to reboot the machine so it can make the changes to the configuration. Ask me here, do I want to restart the computer, and I'll go ahead and say yes. At this point, Windows 95 has rebooted my machine, and now I'm come back up to the logon screen to log on to the Microsoft network. Go ahead and choose OK, and it tells me I've successfully logged on to Traincast, our NT domain. At this point in time, Windows 95 will load the user interface, and now I can use both network cards. I can use the original network card we had installed, as well as the new Novell Anthem NE2000 compatible driver that we just installed. As with the protocols that were supported, Windows 95 is also backwards compatible with older real mode Indus 2.0 network adapter drivers, as well as real mode ODI drivers and IPX COM drivers, which are both used on Novell networks. So again, if you're faced with a dilemma of not having a driver within Windows 95 for your card, you can continue to use your existing drivers that you did under Windows 3.1. There are a number of benefits to the 32-bit protected mode network adapter drivers over the real mode drivers. First, they use no real mode memory, and as we talked about with the clients and the protocols, this is going to be a big benefit to those of you who use MS-DOS based applications. Secondly, they're going to be much faster than their real mode counterparts. They're fully 32-bit. We don't have to switch to real mode to get to the network driver. And then one of the best benefits of network drivers is that they support plug and play. Components and drivers can load on the fly as you insert a card. It'll also notice what type of card it is, so you won't have to choose the specific adapter you're installing. I'm going to demonstrate that here on our Dell Latitude machine. It has a PCMCIA slot, and we have a Zircom Ethernet adapter that I'll be inserting. Basically, I'll insert the card into the slot. And Windows 95 will then recognize the card. It tells me it found new hardware, a Zircom CE10A Corporate Series card. That's what I have. And then it's going to load the appropriate drivers for that card. Because this is the first time I've installed this card, it is going to ask me to reboot. And so I'll go ahead and choose yes and reboot the machine. On subsequent times I insert the card, it's just going to recognize that the card has been inserted and automatically start my network for me. At this point, Windows 95 has rebooted the machine and has now come back up into Windows. And you'll notice that we didn't have to go through the hassle of having to tell it what type of network adapter we had or to configure that adapter's IRQ and IO address settings. So here it asks me to log on to the network. I'll go ahead and it has my username and domain. I'll go ahead and choose OK. And I'm logged onto the network at this point. Once again, I can go to Network Neighborhood, and it'll start searching for any network servers that I have existing on my current network. And here you can see it's found my Novell NetWare server. I can double click on it, and I have access to the NetWare server. As with the network protocols that are supported, the Windows 95 is also backwards compatible with network drivers. In this case, it'll work with Indus 2.0 real mode network adapter drivers, as well as your ODI and your IPX-COM adapter drivers. Those are mainly used in Novell networks. Again, we can use those for backwards compatibility if we don't have a driver listed inside of Windows 95 for your card. Now that you have become familiar with Windows 95, you've looked at the hardware and software that you'll be using with Windows 95, and you've also determined the client configurations that you will be using. You can now begin to utilize these selections in your test lab that you will create. This is a key to successful migration with Windows 95, to develop a test lab that incorporates all aspects of the product and what you'll be using. There are basically two areas of testing that you'll want to focus on when doing your lab testing. The first is network connectivity, and the second is software compatibility. So you want to be able to test connecting to the network and also test your applications. When testing network connectivity, there are a couple of key steps you'll want to perform. The first is just to make sure that you can connect to and browse to your network servers. The second step you'll want to test is installing printing drivers from a network printer and printing. Windows 95 has a new printing subsystem, and you want to make sure that that works properly with your network. Final testing you want to do is opening, running, and closing applications on the client workstation from the server. This would be an example of, say, having an Office install on your server and running it from the client workstation. We're going to do an example here on the 486 machine of some of the testing you might do. Keep in mind, your testing may be more intensive than what we're going to do here, but this is a sample of what we've just told you. At this point, I'll move to the network neighborhood and double-click on this icon. You'll see it's browsed and found my servers out there on the network. First, it's found the Windows NT server. It's also found the Novell NetWare server, and it's found our Windows 95 server. To test the connectivity to these servers, I'll first double-click on the NT server, and you'll see it now shows me any shares and shared printers that I have installed. And I'll go back to the network neighborhood and double-click on the NetWare server. Once again, you can see it shows me the shared directories, in this case the sys folder, as well as any shared printers on the server. And I can also look at the Windows 95 machine. In this case, I haven't shared anything, so it looks blank on the screen. In order to test printing, we'll actually go into the server once again. In this case, we'll double-click on the NT server, and you'll see that it has one print driver installed, the HP4. This is a print queue that's been set up on the network on the Windows NT server. In order for me to install it, all I must do is secondary mouse click on it and choose the install option. Windows 95 will automatically select what type of printer it is, and it will start the printer wizard for me, asking me just a few simple questions. Do I print from DOS-based applications? I'll go ahead and say no here and choose next. Notice it says it's an HP LaserJet 4SI. It's determined that automatically. And it says you already have this driver on your system. I'll go ahead and keep the existing driver. I can give it any name that I want. I could actually call it HP LaserJet on the NT server and choose OK. The final printer wizard screen that you will see asks if you would like to print a test page. And this is probably a good idea for you to go ahead and print the test page, as it is a beginning point to testing printing across your network to your network servers. In our demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and say no and then choose Finish. We have now installed a printer driver into Windows 95 that we can use to print to a printer on the NT server. Next thing that you'll want to test is actually running an application from your server. In this case, we have a server-based setup of MS Office on the NT server, and I have a workstation set up on my local machine. On the 486, I'm going to go back to my icon, and I already have it set up, and there's my icon for Excel. And we're going to try running Excel from the server. As you can see, it quickly comes up, and this means I do have access to the network server, and I am able to run the application. The second area of testing, and this will coincide with the first, is testing your applications. Again, we tested across the network with our application. You want to test both network applications as well as standalone applications, any of them that are used by your organization. When testing applications, you want to look for these key areas. First, you want to look for performance. Your application should be as fast or faster under Windows 95 as it was in Windows 3.1. You also want to look for ease of use. The user interface changes should be better under Windows 95. This also means that you'll be better able to track using multiple applications under Windows 95 than you could under Windows 3.1. Another key benefit that you want to test is the stability. Does your application work well under Windows 95? It should be more stable, and if you do happen to have a problem, you can use the Control-Alt-Delete sequence to close just that one application without having to reboot the entire machine. Another benefit you want to test is compatibility. Does it work as well with your other applications as it did under Windows 3.1? So testing that compatibility with the operating system and with your other applications. And finally, you want to test the functionality. Does the application work as it should under Windows 95? This could really include anything, connecting to the network, perhaps a printing application, or if your application does file management, does that work properly? And finally, if you have a specialized piece of hardware that the application uses, does that work okay under Windows 95? So you can see all of this testing of your applications will help you during your migration process. You have now completed your initial testing in a lab environment. Now it's time to get ready to move to the real thing. The fifth step in the migration process involves 3 steps. First is installing Windows 95 to your servers and automating that installation process. The second step is pilot testing the installation on specific users. And then the final step would be to create a final rollout plan. When automating the installation, there are really a number of things you want to take into account. The first is you do have the ability to create batch scripts. We use the Net Setup EXE program to create these batch scripts. Basically what they do is they allow you to automate how the install process goes so that your users do not have to select all the options available within Setup. I'm going to demonstrate the Net Setup program for you here on our 486 machine. On the 486, you'll want to go to the Net Setup program. Here I've created a shortcut to that quickly on my desktop, and I'll double click on that. You'll see at the top it says Server-Based Setup, and I have a number of options. The very bottom option says Make Script, and here's where I create these batch scripts for myself. I'm going to go ahead and type in a name here, Net Setup .inf, and it brings up a screen that asks me for the default properties. Here's where I can set some of these options. Just to give you some examples, under Network Options and Configuration, I can choose which clients I want to install. If I both want the client for Windows networks, I can select that. I can tell it how I want the client for Windows networks to be installed. If I also want to choose client for NetWare networks, I can also select a number of options there as well. Then when I choose OK, it goes ahead and creates that script for me. Another option that you have available under Net Setup is to install the Windows 95 server. This is what we call a server-based setup, and you also do that from this Net Setup EXE program. I'm going to show you how you'll actually do that on the server. Here we go to the 486 machine. We already have the server-based setup screen located on our monitor here, so now I'll go to the top option, which is where I do the server-based setup. I will choose Set Path, which allows me to tell Windows 95 where to install the server-based setup to. In this case, I'll need to specify my NT server, a shared directory, and I'll also install the directory tell it the directory I want to install it to. At that point, I'm ready to install. All I need to do is click the Install button and tell it if I'd rather have the shared files to be on the server, local, or have the user have the option. In this case, I'll give the user the option and choose OK. It will then ask me if I want to create a batch script that can be used to automate the setup program. Since we already did a Make Script option, I don't need to do this, so I can choose Don't Create Default. At this point, Windows 95 will begin copying all of these files necessary for your server up to the Windows NT machine. The next option that you'll want to consider is whether or not you'll be doing a push installation. What we mean by push installation is how will you determine to force the installation on your Windows 95 users. Some people choose to write this into the login script where it automatically runs the setup program when the user logs into their server. Another option you can do is send a link in mail that automatically runs the setup program of Windows 95. And then finally, if you have some type of server management software, you can use that as well. We'll be covering each of these steps in depth in a further Traincast show on networking. Once you've determined how to automate your installation, the next thing you'll want to begin to develop is your pilot test. Unlike the lab testing, the pilot test uses a real work environment and real users. This is a very good way to gather information about how ready you are to install and support Windows 95 in your entire organization. There are a number of key decisions you'll want to make about selecting your pilot group. The first is you'll want to select a set of users from a variety of different work areas. You may want to choose one person from your accounting group, one person from your management group, and one person from your sales group. In this way, you get a variety of areas, and you'll get a variety of different users and different applications and networking configurations that they use. The next thing you'll want to consider with your pilot group is that they should be able to handle possible downtime. While installing Windows 95, there's a chance that the users will not be able to use their computer, so they should be able to handle this possibility. Your pilot group should also have a willingness to use Windows 95. Here's where you can actually promote Windows 95 in your organization. As other users within their workgroup see their compatriot using Windows 95, they'll have an interest and want to start using it as well. You also want to have a support plan in place for this pilot group. They'll need to know who to contact, how to get a hold of you in case they need assistance with Windows 95. You want to make sure that these users also have training on Windows 95 so that as they're pilot testing for you, they do know how to use the operating system. You want to make sure that you test this for a planned period of time. It should be long enough that you can do a thorough evaluation of how well the install process went and how your users are doing with Windows 95. You'll also be able to get an idea of the applications that you'll be running, any other problems that may happen that you did not see in your lab testing. A couple things to note about the pilot test while you're doing it. Make sure that you do it as a real install. Set up your server as you're going to do it for your entire organization. Do an install process. If you're doing a push install, do it that way. So this pilot test should be as real as possible. You also want to take note of any installation problems or delays that happen because of this installation. Obtain feedback from your users whenever possible. They'll be using Windows 95 not only during the installation, but after you've installed, they'll be using their applications, they'll be using the network. So get feedback from them of how they like it, what might be improved, and changes that you can make to the installation process. Also, make sure you check with your users about usability of your applications. Make sure they understand how Windows 95 works with your new applications. And finally, if large problems do occur, let's say you have problems with the actual installation process, evaluate it, see what you can do to change it, and try your pilot test once again. From all of this testing you've now done some lab testing and you've also done some pilot testing, you can begin to develop this final rollout plan. This should be developed for installing Windows 95 to your entire network, and your rollout plan should take into account a number of key points. First of all, make sure that you have the time and the staff needed to do the entire process. If you have a small organization, this may just be you who is going to do the entire rollout. However, if you belong to a large company, you may need a large group of staff to assist you with the installation process. You want to make sure that you have a training plan in place for your users. There'll be third-party groups that can actually do training, or you can also do your own in-house training of Windows 95. But your users will need to get up to speed before the installation. If you want to add help files into Windows 95, this is detailed in the Windows Resource Kit. You can actually specify certain things for your company and add any tools necessary to help them as well. Your rollout plan should also include a defined list of client workstation configurations that you will be installing Windows 95 to. You'll want to list all of the workstations that will be upgraded, and make sure you detail the client, the protocols, and the network drivers that will be used on each of these workstations. This will make the migration go much more smoother when the time comes to roll it out to your organization. Microsoft has also created a project template that details the steps to migrate to Windows 95. This template will allow you to easily set up your own rollout plan with your specific needs in mind. It does use the Microsoft Project application. We will make this template available by internet email, and we'll tell you how to get it later on in the show. At this point, I'm going to demo the Microsoft Project template so you get an idea of what it does. I'll be doing this on the Dell 486 machine. I actually have Project running on the machine, so I'll go ahead and open that up. And here you can get an idea of the way the template works. This first view provides a high-level overview of the major phases that you see here. This includes things like review product, assembling resources. Many of these things we've actually talked about in today's show. If you would like to see more detail about each of these major phases, you can go ahead and double-click, and you'll see it shows you all of the options. You'll notice on the right-hand side it tells you how many days to plan on using that. And of course, you'll customize this for your own needs. Also, if I were to go up to View and choose Deployment Task Sheet, you'll see it specifies it breaks it down into task itself. So each of these task details, and we have notes to tell us what we could do with the deployment guide. Again, this is a guide to creating your own template, so you'll be able to create your own organizational plan from this. The last thing that's provided with this template is a set of cue cards. Basically what cue cards do is it walks you through a step-by-step process of creating your rollout plan. I'll go ahead and choose Next on this cue card here, and it tells me a little bit more about how to start planning. And then it gives me an option, what do you want to do? And I have a number of options here. I can create a new project from the template. I can go ahead and look at an overview of my entire project. You can see here there are a number of detailed steps provided. At this point, we have reached the sixth and the final step of our installation process. This will actually be the final installation where you roll it out to your organization. Based on what you have done in the previous 5 steps, you should be pretty confident and ready to install Windows 95. But here are some steps and tips that you can use while performing the actual migration. The first step is to actually set up the distribution servers. And here you will use the Net Setup EXE program that we showed you earlier. You also want to make sure that you create any customized batch files to automate this process. The next thing you'll want to do is make sure that your users are trained and ready. Like you did with your pilot test group, you'll want to make sure that all of your organization that will be using Windows 95 is now ready to go with Windows. The next step is also communicate the process of the installation to all users. Make sure that they know when Windows 95 will be installed and what they can expect on their machines. Finally, if you need to prepare your clients, make sure you do that appropriately. If they need to be backed up, go ahead and back it up now. Check for any viruses on those computers and defrag the hard drives. This is a pretty good step when installing any new operating system. And then finally, you need to prepare the client to access any network servers necessary for installation. In this case, if you need to load ODI drivers to get to your NetWare server, make sure those are loaded and they can access the distribution server. So here we have 6 steps that you can use to make your migration to Windows 95 go smoothly and quickly. Once again, let me remind you that the deployment guide in the Windows 95 Resource Kit will offer these in detail, a step-by-step guide you can follow. We've also mentioned a number of other resources, such as the project template shown earlier, that you can also use to help you with your rollout plan. In the next segment of our show, we're going to talk about an actual step-by-step installation of Windows 95 over Windows for Workgroups.
Thank you, Johnny. Those were really practical first steps. As you know, every organization is different, and the deployment guide will be a very good starting point for you. Joining us now is Dilip Wagle, who's the product manager for Windows 95. And as you know out there, what you've just heard is a lot of very practical information, and I'm sure there's some questions. And we've had a number of questions already coming in from our engineers. First one is from New York City, and I'm from New York City, and they always get to the heart of the matter. Joan from New York City is interested in knowing a single question. When will Windows 95 ship? So Dilip, I'll put you right on the spot.
Well, Elliot, that's a good question. We've had a number of people ask us that. The answer to that is really we'll ship when we're ready. At this point, we feel really comfortable, given the bug counts, that we will be shipping in the first half of 1995. But as I said, product's got to be solid before it goes out.
Okay. It's over to you, Johnny. Bob from Atlanta called and wanted to know how will Windows 95 work in an IBM LAN server environment? Will it work in that context?
Yes, actually there will be two options that they can use to work with OS2 LAN server. The first is to use the Microsoft client, and this is the one we just finished installing and talking about. You can use that because the OS2 LAN server is an SMB-based server, so our client will talk to that. Secondly, if you have an existing Windows 3.1 installation with the OS2 LAN server software installed, we will upgrade that and keep that existing installation, so we can use the existing 16-bit components to talk to your servers.
Okay, another question from Colorado Springs. Dan wanted to know, does Windows 95 require MS-DOS, or is it really a true standalone operating system?
Actually, it's a good question. Windows 95 is going to be replacing your existing MS-DOS. It does not require any MS-DOS undercarriage. And contrary to what you may have heard, it does not. Windows 95 is not a shell on top of MS-DOS. It's a true 32-bit multitasking operating system. But it does allow you to run your existing MS-DOS or Windows 3.1 applications.
Okay. Over to you, Johnny. Sean from Louisville, Kentucky wanted to know what happens if an older Windows 3.1 application replaces one of the newer Windows 95 key or system files. Is there a version check that prevents this from happening?
Yes, that's a really good question. As a matter of fact, Windows 95 keeps track of certain key components of core files of Windows 95. And if those files get replaced, it does a version check every time you boot Windows 95. If it determines that they have been replaced, it gives the user the option to restore that existing file so that the Windows 95 file will replace it, or to use the test button. Go ahead and try it out and see if it works okay with that component that got installed by that application.
Okay. Ron from Chicago wants to know, where can I get more information on plug-and-play compatible machines?
Well, actually, we have a plug-and-play guide that we're putting out that he can get access to. He needs to just subscribe to Win News or call us up at Microsoft, and we'd be able to help them out.
Let me put you on the spot.
Okay.
In terms of plug-and-play, is it truly plug or play? I mean, if I have a network card I got on a stall in Singapore somewhere, is that going to work?
It is, actually. One of the things we're doing is trying to ensure that any existing hardware or software that you have running today on your machines will be fully backward compatible with that. With Windows 95. And so your network card from Singapore, for example, should be able to run with plug-and-play machines. But we need to, the reason we're taking so long in some people's eyes to ship is because we want to make sure that we really test all these different configurations. We want to make sure the product is really robust and works with these cards.
Okay. My own personal experience, I know that in the days of Windows 3.1, if I was doing an install and something went wrong, I remember once I was on an airplane and I had a problem, and took me the rest of the flight to sort of figure that out.
Right.
What happens in terms of Windows 95 if a real dilemma occurs during the install?
Well, we've worked to try and improve the setup process so that there's little risk to your machine locking up or something going wrong. But we can't really guarantee to your users that this is not going to happen, that you won't experience problems with setup. So we've installed a number of features such as the safe recovery option. And what this does is it keeps track of where the setup process is and determines where it can pick up the next time you run setup. So for example, if you're running setup and it locks your machine, You run setup again, Windows 95 setup immediately knows where to go and pick up where it left off at. So it recovers quickly.
Dilip, we had a call from Carol, who's a help desk manager from Dallas, and Carol was interested in, she's got a number of people who are going to be providing their frontline support for Windows 95. What should she be planning in terms of getting them up and running? What should be their path to competency and literacy?
Well, if Carol's watching this show, she's taken the first step, and that's great. She should be watching Traincast and all succeeding versions of the same. She should also be subscribing to Win News, making sure she's on top of where the product is at the moment. We have a number of technical education centers. She should be trying to get her people trained over there. Elliot, while the product itself is really easy to use, and we've spent a lot of time in trying to make sure that a novice user or an intermediate user will have no problems with the product, it's never too early to start planning. So as Johnny went through this in the earlier session where he talked about the project template and the project management process, it's time to begin now. You can start planning your rollout today.
As I was listening to you describe the various different features, I was tracking it, but at times I was saying, I wish I had a hard copy of this. Where can our viewers actually get this information in hard copy?
Yeah, the steps that I just went through are detailed in the Windows 95 deployment guide, and this is available in the Windows 95 resource kit. The best way to get this is to go ahead and call us here at Microsoft or subscribe to the Win News, and there's information about how to obtain that in Win News.
And actually, if I could interject, Elliot, we will be showing the resource kit will be available as training documentation for this very program, so people can get it. People watching Traincast can also get a copy of the resource kit.
Last question to you, Dilip. Any news on price or costing or the like?
It's still too early. What we've decided is that the product will be priced at under $100, but that's about as much as we can say at this time.
Okay, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned. That's exactly
and
right.
as Traincast proceeds, will we be getting some additional information and updates and future shows?
Absolutely. As Traincast proceeds, we will be tracking the product build by build. Also, the last session of Traincast will have a wrap-up which tells you all the things that have changed in the product and things that you should be prepared for.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all the time we have for questions during this section. However, Dilip and Johnny will be back after the next segment to take your questions. Now, I can ask the best questions if you send them in. And the way to do that is right now call 206-635-7066 anytime during today's show. And in addition, our Windows 95 engineers are there to answer your questions in an immediate fashion. The very first contact that anyone has with Windows 95 is during initial installation on their computer. I know from my experience that the installation process can be a source of frustration for many users, especially if it is not easy or if the novice or intermediate users are confronted with a series of configuration-related questions. Or in previous versions of Windows, probably the only way you could get help was either to call a help desk or find a support engineer. However, in Windows 95, the setup has been redesigned from the ground up to provide both greater flexibility and modularity. And this allows for the easy customization in corporate installations. In the next session, Johnny is going to walk us through the new setup process step by step.
In the first segment of our show, we looked at how to plan the installation of Windows 95. In this segment, we will actually walk through an installation of Windows 95 over Windows for Workgroups 3.11. Here, we will show you all of the options available to you that you'll have available during setup. We'll actually do a step-by-step process so that you can see all of the screens that will come up. Now, there are a number of new features of the Windows 95 setup process that will make your installation go much easier. Among these features includes being able to set up from inside of Windows. If you've ever set up Windows 3.1, you'll notice that you always had to go to DOS to be able to run the setup program. Now you can remain within Windows and go ahead and run that setup process. And actually, if you're at MS-DOS and you want to go ahead and run setup, you can. It loads what we call a mini version of Windows. This allows us to actually run the setup program with a Windows look and feel for the user. We also have much better hardware detection and configuration. We can detect almost all of your devices, whether they be plug-and-play or non-plug-and-play, and that's what we call a legacy device. Setup also has improved customization options. Basically, what we mean by this is we have wizards, and wizards help guide the user in a step-by-step process through the setup. If they ever want to change their mind or go back to a previous selection and change it, they can do that with the wizards. Setup also has a feature called Safe Recovery. And with Safe Recovery, if there is a problem during setup, let's say your power just happens to go down while you're doing setup, Safe Recovery will automatically pick up where it left off and keep on going with that setup process. It also maintains a constant log of where it's at during the setup program so that it knows quickly where to pick up from. A final feature of setup that's new to Windows 95 is the Verify Install. And with Verify Install, rather than actually setting up Windows 95 again, it verifies the existing installation. It checks every single file that you installed to make sure that that file is correct. If it has been corrupted or deleted, it will go ahead and replace it. So this is a good way to troubleshoot any problems that you're having with Windows 95 by using this Verify installation. Now, before we actually start our step-by-step process, there are a number of decisions you will need to make. The first decision is, will you run Windows from within MS-DOS or from within Windows? There are some advantages to each. If you're going to run setup from within Windows, you'll actually want to consider whether or not you're going to install to a new directory. While running within Windows, you can only upgrade your existing Windows directory. So if you do want to install to a new directory, you'll need to go to MS-DOS. Also, while running from within Windows, setup can better detect what drivers you have loaded so that it can better upgrade them during the installation process. A second decision that you'll want to make is whether or not to go ahead and upgrade your existing Windows directory or install to a new directory. If you upgrade your existing Windows directory, it will better be able to preserve the settings that you had in, say, Windows 3.1. You will not have to reinstall your applications, or you won't have to change your resolution of your video screen or how your desktop looks. If you do install to a new directory, however, you will be able to run your previous version of MS-DOS by using a selection in the boot menu. The final decision that you want to make is, where is Windows 95 going to be installed from? Now, you'll probably have already made this decision, but take into account these facts. If you're installing from a network, you will need to have the network drivers loaded on the workstation. This is so you can get access to the server to install. If you'll be installing from a CD-ROM, you also need to make sure you have your CD-ROM drivers loaded. And finally, if you're going to be installing from floppies, you want to plan on having more time to do the installation, as a floppy-based setup will take longer. At this point, we're going to begin our step-by-step process and show you how the setup actually works. We'll get under the hood again, and so you can see what's happening. We'll be working from the Pentium machine that is currently running Windows for Workgroups 3.11. What I'll be doing is connecting to the Windows NT server, and I have a net setup directory already created there of Windows 95. So I'll be starting first of all by connecting to the server here. And you'll notice I've actually already answered my 3 questions. First of all, will I be installing from DOS or Windows? I will be installing from Windows here. Will I be upgrading or clean install? Because I am installing from Windows, it'll automatically answer that question to be an upgrade. And finally, I know I'll be installing from the network. I have my network drivers loaded under Windows for Workgroups 3.11. So here I'll go to the Pentium machine, and you'll notice we have the Program Manager from Windows for Workgroups 3.11, and I'm going to run File Manager to connect to my network server. I have a connection here on drive D already to NT Server Net Setup. And under the retail directory, I'll run setup.exe. Now, the first screen that we get here is the Welcome to Windows 95 setup. And it congratulates you, first of all, for your choice of Windows 95. Secondly, it tells you about approximate time of what it's going to take to install Windows 95, about 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the speed of your computer. I'm going to go ahead and choose Continue here. And the next screen you'll see is it's performing a routine check of my system. What this means is it's doing a version of MS-DOS 6's scan disk, checking my hard drive for file allocation problems, possible sector problems. This will prevent setup from failing because of these type of situations. So it's going to do a quick check on all of my drives. If I were actually running setup from MS-DOS, it would run an MS-DOS version of ScanDisk. You can see it has a progress bar to tell you how it's doing. At this point, it's preparing Windows setup screen. Here it's copying files necessary to actually run the setup program. And it's also doing a quick check of my system to make sure I have the necessary components. The next screen is my software license agreement. And here is where it's going to actually check to see if you have an existing version of Windows to upgrade, because this is an upgrade version of Windows 95. It's going to look for a certain Windows directory, and because I'm running from Windows for Workgroups, it's going to be able to find it immediately. So here I'll go ahead and choose yes, that I agree to the license agreement. The next screen that we see is actually the introductory wizard screen. Here it tells you a little bit about how wizards work, tells you the 3 steps that setup will go through in order to complete this process. So the first wizard actually introduces you to how to use a wizard. You'll notice I have a next button, I have a back button, and I also have a cancel button. The next and the back button actually move me through the wizards. So if I make a decision at one wizard, and then a few wizards down the road decide I need to make a change in that, I can always use the back button to go back to it and make that change. So at this point, from the introductory wizard, I'll go ahead and choose next. The next wizard screen asks me to choose my directory where I will be installing Windows 95. In this case, if I'm running from Windows, I need to go ahead and use the default, which is my current Windows directory, c:\\Windows. Setup actually will scan your directories for any versions of Windows out there, and will default to any version that it does find. If I was running from MS-DOS, I could choose other directory, and then on the next screen I would be able to specify the directory I wanted to install to. At this point, I'll leave it on the default and choose next. At this point, setup begins to prepare the directory. What it's doing here is it's actually first scanning for known TSRs and drivers that can cause problems with setup. This really is a list is in a binary setup file, and it cannot be changed, but it will warn you of any typical problems that you may have with certain drivers and ask that you remark those out of your config.sys and autoexec.bat and restart the program. The other check that setup makes is for disk space. Again, it's actually done a check earlier, but now you've specified where you will be installing to, and it's going to make sure it has enough space to install Windows 95 and give you a warning if you do not. The next wizard that we see here on the screen asks us for the setup options. And here we actually have 4 choices. We can choose a typical, portable, compact, or custom setup. A typical setup is going to be recommended for most computers. Now this does not install all the components of Windows 95. There are some options that are going to be left out that are typically not used by your normal user. The portable option will set up Windows 95 conserving disk space, but making sure that you have all of the remote features of Windows 95. Things like dial-up networking, being able to access your modem to call up another computer, things typically important on a portable workstation. The next selection that we have is compact. And what a compact installation does is to conserve as much disk space as possible. And here the point is to install as few options as possible in order that you can get Windows 95 up and running with a minimal installation. The final selection is custom, and this is for advanced users and system administrators who want to actually physically select certain components. We'll see the custom installation screen later. I'm going to go ahead and choose custom now, and you'll see that wizard comes a few more wizards down the road here. The next wizard screen is the user information screen, and what this asks for is your name and company. Now this isn't used for any type of verification or check of whether or not you have Windows installed. All this is used for is for certain help files, for applications that may identify who the registered user is. They'll pick that up from this information that you type in here now. So I will go ahead and type in my name. And my company, Microsoft. And choose Next. The next wizard screen actually asks me to begin the detection process. Here it's going to analyze my computer. You know, there's actually a number of these detection wizards that you'll see. This is one of the most important new features of our setup process. In the past, in Windows for Workgroups and Windows 3.11, we actually did a minimal detection. We would detect perhaps what type of video card you had, maybe your network adapter. Now we're going to detect all your devices. And the reason we do this is because now we're going to load protected mode drivers for all of your hardware. Now, the detection process will not detect plug-and-play devices. That will be done later in the setup process. there are a few classes of devices that setup will not be able to detect, and we'll take time to look at all the devices that can be selected. It asks me which do I want setup to look for hardware devices. First of all, it says yes, look for all of them, or no, I want to change that list. I'm going to say no to show you the options that are available. Now I get the hardware types that I do want it to detect. And here's where I can turn off, perhaps I know I don't have a network adapter. I could deselect that, and that will save some time in the detection process. Or perhaps I don't have a PCMCA socket. Again, I can turn that off by just unclicking the checkbox. At this point, I may decide, well, I want it to detect everything, and notice I'm in a wizard, so I can go back and choose yes, go ahead and detect everything. Again, this is the recommended way to do detection. When I choose next at this point, it gives me another prompt. It says setup will check to see what kind of hardware is in your computer, and it asks me for certain types of devices. This is what's known as safe detection. Windows 95 first performs safe detection. What it does is, first of all, it checks your configuration files, your config sys, your auto exec, perhaps your protocol INI, and your system INI from your existing Windows installation. It will also look at ROM strings in memory to see what, if there's any hints of a device on your system. A number of devices on your machine will register the certain ROM strings in memory. And then finally, if a driver is loaded in memory itself, we can actually check this physical RAM memory for signs of a device. We have a number of hints we can look for that tell us what type of device and what settings they use. This is known as safe detection because generally it's not going to cause any problems during the setup process. This last method is a part of detection that's not quite as safe because what it does is we do what's called I/O port inquiries. To explain that in simple terms, we're writing to a certain I/O port looking for a specific device. If that device exists, it will give us a response back. If that device does not exist, we will get no response and assume the device is not installed in your machine. Now, the problem may come if we write to a specific I/O port and a different device is there than what we expected. It's possible we could disable that device or even worse, cause setup to fail and lock your machine. So this next screen actually asks you if you have those devices. It has not found any hints on this particular machine of a CD-ROM drive. It has also not found any hints in my INI files of a sound card or a MIDI card or a video capture card. Now I do know that I have a CD-ROM drive, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. I also know that I do not have a sound card, so I will not select that. Again, what I'm doing here is it will not do that I/O port inquiry for the sound devices. So that'll be a benefit in saving time as well as possibly avoiding any possible trouble with detection. So at this point I'll go ahead and choose next. At this point the detection process actually begins. During this detection it will indicate a progress bar to tell you how far along it goes. Because there are so many different types of devices out there, so many different types of things we need to look for, detection may take some time. Expect anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes for a typical detection process. And of course your progress bar will indicate how far along it's going as well. At this point, for our demonstration, I'm going to actually power down the machine to simulate a failure. In one case you would actually just see the progress bar stop for about a minute or longer. If you see it do that, that probably indicates a problem and you'll want to go ahead and reboot the machine. Since I probably won't have a problem, and in general you will not, I will power down the machine to simulate this type of failure. So here we're at 91%, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off the machine, as if Windows 95 locked my machine. And then I'm going to actually bring back up the machine so that it'll be able to reboot. And we're going to see another feature of detection called safe recovery. This is a very key feature of setup in that it allows us to be able to recognize a problem, recognize a failure, and recover from that. So now my Dell Pentium is going to boot back up. And you'll notice it's immediately giving me a screen that says Windows Setup Safe Recovery. This is a DOS screen, so we haven't actually entered Windows at this point. It says Windows Setup could not complete installing Windows. You will need to run Setup again and choose the Safe Recovery when prompted. It also makes a note for you to not delete any files or reconfigure your system. If setup has already started copying files, your previous version of Windows may not run properly, so you might want to go ahead and run it from DOS. In this case, we never got to the point of copying files. We were still in detection. So I'm going to go ahead and run Windows again. This will start up my Windows for Workgroups program. And as Windows for Workgroups boots up, I'll again want to be thinking about connecting to my NT server and rerunning the setup process again. At this point, I have been successfully logged into my NT server, so I'll choose OK. I'll open up File Manager again in Windows for Workgroups, and I will connect to my NT server net setup subdirectory. Go to the retail subdirectory under that and run the setup program again. And that's all I need to do to have safe recovery respond. Again, I'll see the continue screen, and it will want to do a check again on my hard drive. It does this because powering down a system can always cause lost allocation units, possible problems with your hard drive. So again, setup will check for that. And you'll see the progress bar that does that here. Now, the safe recovery process that we'll see in just a moment keeps track of the progress of setup in a file called setuplog.txt. This is a file that will exist in your root directory. So if you actually wanted to view that before running Windows again, you could take a look at that to see where setup failed. During the detection process, setup also keeps track of how detection moves along using two files. The first called detcrash.log and the second file called detlog.txt. The detlog.txt will be something you can use to view how far into detection it went. It will actually tell you what device it was last looking for and what I/O address it was querying to see where it actually locked up at. So you can tell, well, perhaps my video card was causing the problem. You'll know that it's going to skip that I/O address the next time it does detection so that it can avoid the problem. This may actually cause an issue where that particular device is not detected. But don't worry, because once Windows 95 is set up, you can actually go into a screen that we'll show you later on in our show how to add that hardware in manually. At this point, we get the software license agreement, and again, I'll say yes, because I have an existing version of Windows on my machine. Now I get the safe recovery screen, and it tells me it ran into problems and did not complete the previous installation. So you can see it recognized that it had a problem, and I'll tell it to go ahead and use safe recovery. If you tell it do not use safe recovery, it's going to actually go ahead and perform the detection process again and may again cause your machine to lock up. So it's recommended that you choose use safe recovery here on the screen. So I'll go ahead and leave that option and choose next. The next dialog box tells me setup has determined that hardware detection failed to complete. And it tells me I can go ahead and run setup again, and it will, during detection, will skip when setup runs detection at that point. So I'll choose OK. Again, it will walk through the wizards and have me verify the selections I've made previously. So if I do want to make any changes, I have that option here now. Checking for installed components. And it will also check for disk space. I've satisfied all those requirements there. Again, I'll choose Custom, as we did before, and choose Next. User information is already located here because I typed it in during our last setup process. Choose Next there. Now we get to the detection screen again. And here it asks me, do you want setup to redetect your hardware devices and bypass that one piece of hardware that caused the error? I'll go ahead and say yes, redetect now. One thing you'll notice is, again, I want to tell it that I have a CD-ROM drive. And if I determined by looking at the detlog.txt earlier that it was perhaps the CD-ROM drive causing the problem, I could not check it if I wanted to. I'll go ahead and check it again because I think detection has determined where it caused the problem. And I'll choose Next. Again, we'll see a progress bar. And you'll notice that quickly what it's doing here is verifying devices it's already detected. It's not going through the full detection process until it gets to that point, 91%, where it locked up before. So in a moment, you'll see it quickly jump up to 91%. And now it's all the way, as a matter of fact, all the way up to 96% of the detection process. So you can see it's quickly moved through detection again here. It's going to pick up where it left off and finish detecting any devices it has not yet looked for. Okay, we've reached 100% of detection, and the next wizard screen that we'll see is the custom setup screen. This wizard, if I would have selected typical install or portable, I would not have seen this particular wizard. It would actually give me another screen that asked me if I want to go to this component dialog box. Because I chose custom setup, it has now brought up this dialog box that lets me pick and choose where I want to install from. Here you'll notice it's got two areas to look at. First of all is what components are currently selected. That's under Components. Here you see a number of options: accessories, communications tools, the Microsoft Exchange or Microsoft Fax. On the other side you'll see a description of what that particular component is. It also tells me how many subcomponents are selected. Each of these menus has subcomponents, and you can see those by choosing Details. You'll see it said I had 6 of 20, and you'll notice there are a number of components that were not installed. The briefcase, for example, the character mapper. We'll talk about some of these during the next portion of our show, but you'll notice by default they may not always be used by some of your typical users, so they're not selected. Now, I'll go ahead and choose OK here. I could select as many or as few, or deselect whichever ones I did not want to select. Go ahead and choose OK here. A nice feature of this first screen is that you'll notice that it's got a checkbox beside accessories, but that it's got a gray background to the checkbox. This is because not every subcomponent has been selected. Now, if I unselect accessories and then reselect it, you'll notice it selects all subcategories underneath that, 20 of 20 components selected. It also tells you the amount of disk space that will take up. So if you're running a little bit low on disk space, you could be able to tell how much each component will take up. I'll do this for each one of my components because I, as an advanced user, want to go ahead and select all of my components. Everything Windows 95 has to offer, I want to use. You'll also notice at the very bottom it tells you the space needed by setup based on the components you've selected and the space currently available on your setup drive. One other feature is if I want to go back to the default, I can choose Reset and it will do that for me. Notice again, 6 of 20 components selected for accessories. Once again, I will highlight every selection so that we'll be able to demonstrate these to you in a later segment of our show. And now I'll choose Next to proceed on in the wizard progress. Again, if I decide maybe I didn't want that one particular component, I can always come back to this during the wizard process. The next screen that you'll see is the network configuration screen. Now this will assume that you have a network adapter installed. If Windows 95 could not find a network component and you did a custom setup, it will prompt you, do you have a network adapter, and ask you to pick it and choose from the list of network adapters we have available. Actually here in this process it has detected my Intel Ether Express 16 or 16TP. You can see that here in the first network configuration screen. I can also check the properties of this and choose resources, and you'll see it also found the interrupt that's being used as well as the I/O address. Now this is something that's done during the detection process, so you won't have to choose. Your users will not have to know where their components are located. You'll notice it has a number of default features. It's installed the client for Microsoft Networks. It's installed 2 protocols. We've got the IPX-SPX protocol and we've got the NetBEUI protocol. The reason it's picked those is because that's what I had installed in my previous Windows for Workgroup 3.11 installation. Windows 95 will keep an existing 16-bit networks installation from Windows 3.1 if it doesn't have something it can upgrade to, a protected mode client. You'll also notice that this screen looks very similar to what you've seen in our previous segment of our show where we detailed the network components and how to install the preferred clients. In this case, I've only got the client for Microsoft Networks, so I'll go ahead and choose Add, and I would like to add the client for NetWare Networks here under Microsoft Manufacturer. This is so I can connect to both my NT machine as well as my Novell NetWare server. And I'll go ahead and choose Next. The next screen is the computer identification screen. Those of you who are familiar with Windows for Workgroups will understand this screen. The computer name is what identifies your machine in a peer-to-peer server environment. So that if someone wanted to connect to my machine and access files on my hard drive or access printers, they could use this particular computer name, what we've called Traincast 2 here. The next option is the workgroup name. And again, if you're familiar with Windows for Workgroups or perhaps Microsoft LAN Manager, the workgroup name is used for browsing to connect to the computers. This is where you can see all the computers on your network quickly. It uses this workgroup. Anyone in a similar workgroup, and each one of my machines are, the Windows NT machine is in the Traincast workgroup, The Windows 95 machine is in the Traincast workgroup, and my existing Windows for Workgroups machine was in the Traincast workgroup. They'll all be able to see quickly in my network neighborhood. The computer description generally will take your username that you typed in earlier in a wizard. This is just an identification to someone else on the network as to who this computer is. At this point, I'll go ahead and choose Next because I like the default options it has given me here. The next screen is the computer settings screen. And here is where it tells you what components it has detected. You'll notice some of the selections here we have display. It's detected that I have an S3 928 chipset. It's also detected my keyboard, my machine, the mouse that I have, and this is where I can just verify it. Normally you won't have to make any selections here. The one exception will be the monitor. We cannot detect monitors with our current technology. However, what you can do is double click on monitor and you have the option to tell it what type of monitor you have. Again, you'll notice it's done by this standard select device screen where I have manufacturer and model. In this case, I'll go to Dell and you'll notice that my particular monitor type is not listed here. If not, I can actually go back up to the top where it says standard monitor types. I know that I have Super VGA monitor that can do 1024 by 768. So I'll go ahead and select that option and choose OK. Again, it comes back to the computer settings screen where I can verify any other components listed here. One other option you may want to note is the user interface option. Here I can select user interface and it's currently set to Windows 95 by default. If I choose change, you'll notice my other available choice is Windows 3.1 Program Manager. If you have users who are not quite up to speed with Windows 95 and they're used to Windows 3.1 Program Manager, you can have that come up as the default user interface. So they'll still be able to use that while they're learning the Windows 95 user interface option. At this point, I want to show you the Windows 95 screens, so I'll go ahead and leave that with Windows 95 and choose OK. I like the computer settings it has chosen for me, so again, I'll go ahead and choose Next. We're nearing the end of the wizard process, and one of the last screens is the Startup Diskette. The Startup Diskette is a very important process here. This is where you'll specify whether you want setup to create a startup disk for you. This will typically be a floppy disk that you'll be booting from. And the default option is yes, I want a startup disk. We recommend this because it can be used for if you encounter problems booting up into Windows 95, your machine does not boot at all, you can boot off the startup disk, and it has a number of tools and utilities such as ScanDisk that allow you to check your hard drives for possible problems. At this point, I'll go ahead and say yes, I want to create a startup disk. If you're doing a number of network installs, you may not want to create a startup disk every time. You'll just create one, and then for the rest of your installs, you'll choose no. So you do have that option available to you. I'll keep it at yes and choose Next. And now I've come to the final wizard screen. This is where it starts copying files. Lets you know that it now has enough information to actually begin copying files. Here's your last chance to actually go back and make changes as well. If I decided maybe I didn't want to install a certain component, I could choose back and go back to any of my screens that I've already gone through and deselect any components. At this point, I've reviewed them. I decided, no, I think I like my selections. Let me move back ahead to that final screen. The next step is going to be actually copying files. So when I choose Next, it's going to begin the copying of devices. Here, the first option in copying devices is to copy files for the startup diskette. You'll notice there's a progress bar for the startup diskette. It gets to about 20%. At this point, the Windows 95 setup screen prompts me to insert my startup diskette. So I'll go ahead and do that now. I've inserted my floppy disk into the drive, and now I'll choose OK. And it begins copying files to this startup diskette. Now, the startup diskette will normally take anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes to finish copying files. At that point, you'll see the progress bar again start over and begin counting the actual copying of files to the hard drive. So we'll go ahead and let that continue as it continues to copy files to my startup diskette. When it does start copying files to the hard drive, you'll notice that we actually can begin copying files that are only needed for the components I have selected. So that way it doesn't take as long. We don't have to copy every single file of the Windows 95 product. Also, one of the things that you'll notice is that there will be a browse button available if it cannot find a certain file. Let's say, for example, you have a third-party driver that you need to have, that you've checked during the setup process. If it cannot find that file, which it won't be in the Windows 95 product because it is a third-party driver, you'll have a Browse button. You can insert another floppy disk, and it will ask you, where is that file? You choose Browse, and you can point to that file. One other nice feature about this process is that we are running from within Windows for Workgroups 3.1.1. At this point, I can use the Alt-Tab switch because I'm running Windows for Workgroups 3.1.1 to switch to perhaps File Manager to find a file if necessary. I'm going to demonstrate that on this machine. You'll notice on this machine, Setup has finished creating my startup disk. And it says, please remove the disk and click OK. So I'll go ahead and choose OK. Now it starts to copy files actually for the Windows 95 installation. Here, if it did happen to have an error and not be able to find a file, I could use the Alt-Tab key to switch away to Program Manager, for example. And here I would be able to use Program Manager or perhaps use File Manager to find a file if necessary. When I'm done, I then just switch right back to the Windows 95 setup screen. And you can see it's still continuing to copy files. You also notice there are a number of banners that come up, just giving you more information about Windows 95 during the copy process. Again, expect another 15 to 30 minutes for the copy process to complete. It will depend really on the speed of your machine as to how long it will actually take to copy files. During this process, Safe Recovery can also assist in problems copying files. Once again, if setup stops or the power cuts off during copying, Safe Recovery will remember what was the last file it copied. At that point, when I reboot the machine and restart the setup process, it will pick it up where it left off, only verifying the files it has already copied over. This will save a lot of time if you're doing a floppy installation, or perhaps you're installing across a very slow network. This will save time in actually copying those files across. The setup process we've just walked through can be automated so that all of these wizards are automatically chosen for your users. This can be a very beneficial feature for IS managers. There are three ways to typically do an automated setup, and we've talked about a number of them in our previous show. The first is to create a batch file that automates all of these selections for you. You can use the Net Setup program that we demonstrated in a previous show to automatically create these batch files for you. We also have the Windows 95 Resource Kit that gives you a guide to actually creating the file manually and gives as many options as you'd like so that you can tell it automatically what username, whether or not to do detection. Any of the wizards that we've seen in the past can be automatically done. Another option that you'll have once Windows 95 setup is complete is to use policy files. And policy files are used on boot up of Windows 95. It'll actually read this file to tell it what features will be enabled and disabled. So this is a great way for you to control what features your users can have and what features you may want to restrict them from being able to change. The final option that you can use to automate setup is to actually do the full install step by step as we've done, selecting the components you want for your typical user. At the end of setup, you will have a file called setuplog.txt. We mentioned that file earlier. You can actually use this file as your batch file, and any options that you selected will be automatically selected for your user when you run setup again. So typically you'd copy setup log text, might want to give it an INF extension, setuplog.inf, take it to the next machine and do setup space and the name of that INF file. It automatically goes through the exact same installation without you having to choose anything. So it's a great feature for automating the setup process. One other feature that's going on during the entire setup process that we've demonstrated here is it's creating what's known as the registry. If you're familiar with Windows NT, you've heard the term the registry before. If not, it's basically a hardware and software database of all of your information about Windows 95. It's all combined into one central database. This fixes some of the problems in Windows 3.1 that we saw where information about software or hardware was scattered throughout a number of INI files. You've probably become very familiar with the System INI and the WinINI settings as you've supported your Windows 3.1 users in the past. Well, now we no longer have to worry about all these different INIs. They're all contained within the registry. The registry is basically composed of two files, the system.dat and the user.dat. Both of these files will exist in your Windows directory, and they will be hidden system files. So typically a user will not be able to access them unless they know a little bit more about computers. Another option with the registry is that typically you will not have to go into the registry to make changes. All of the options that you will change inside the registry can be done through the Windows 95 user interface. If, however, you do want to make a change, you'll want to consult the Windows 95 Resource Kit, which details all of the options you have available in the registry. To quickly show you how you can do the registry, I'm going to switch over to my other Windows 95 machine. This machine is my Dell 486 that's currently running Windows 95, and so I will switch over to it now. To perform the registry edit program, we actually run a file called regedit. And I actually have set up a shortcut or a link to my file called regedit. That's located here at the top of my screen. I will double click on that and it runs the registry editor. And here's where you can physically go in and make changes to the registry. Now again, please note that most registry changes should be done through the UI rather than having to change these keys. I will pull down a key. In this case, HKey local machine contains all of my hardware specific information. You can see here if I open up the enum key and then I open up the root key, there are a number of devices listed here. These kind of cryptic names that you see here identify my hardware that I have on my machine. And if I were to open this up, you'll see this is my SCSI adapter located here. It tells me what my SCSI adapter is. If I did want to make any changes, I could do that here. Again, you'll want to consult the Windows 95 Resource Kit as to what these keys mean and what kind of changes you can make to them. But this is a good way for you to manually go in and change the registry if that's ever necessary. At this point, I will be switching back to the Windows 95 setup program on our Pentium machine. And you can see that it is now completed finishing setup. And I have a finishing setup wizard screen. It tells me it is now ready to start Windows 95 and begin the last part of setup. So at this point, we have finished this part of our show. Setup has now been completed. However, setup will need to do more once we reboot the machine. And we'll cover that in the next segment of our show. We'll actually go through the boot up, the first boot of Windows 95. Then we'll look at a typical boot up after you've completed setup, and we'll troubleshoot some of the booting problems in the next segment of our show.
Thanks again, Johnny. Setup has been improved substantially over previous versions of Windows. Johnny, now you're back at the table here. Let me ask you a question. In my Windows 3.1 installation at work, a system file became accidentally corrupted, and we had a terrible time recovering from that. Has Microsoft addressed this problem in Windows 9.5?
Actually, we have. There's a component inside of Setup that allows you to do what's called a verify install. So once you've had Windows 95 installed on your machine, you just run the Setup program again, and it will ask you, do you want to do a verify? What this does is this only checks your existing files that have already been installed into Windows 95. Rather than reinstalling every component, it does a check to make sure that those files are okay. If it's missing or corrupted, it goes ahead and replaces it from your distribution diskettes.
And I would imagine that help desk professionals will find this a helpful tool.
Instead of having to search and reinstall and search and reinstall, you can run verify and it automatically finds what file to replace.
Dilip, we had a call from Robert from Michigan that wanted to know the purpose of having a dual boot for NT and Windows 95, and also wanted to know what is Windows 95's multimedia support.
Okay. Well, the purpose really, Robert, is that we want to make sure that if somebody's an IS manager, they will have need for both Windows NT and Windows 95. Windows NT is a great server operating system. Windows 95 is a client operating system. And so on the same machine, you would be able to do system management. We've provided a host of system management tools, and a future version of Traincast we will be going through details on this. So that's the reason you need both. To respond to your question on Windows 95 multimedia support, we've spent a lot of time with ISVs on trying to get them to write to the WinG API that we are trying to promote. In addition to that, we've got autoplay, which allows you to just insert a CD diskette into the machine, and it'll play it automatically. In addition to that, you can have all the drivers are now 32-bit protect mode drivers, so you can see a lot of AVI files playing simultaneously. So there is a lot of built-in multimedia support in the operating system.
Spoken like a truly excited product manager here. I want to just let the viewers know, because very often biology takes a play in learning, that we will be taking a break in about 6 minutes or so. So bear with us for a couple more important questions. We had a question, and jargon is often a challenge in learning. Bruce from California wanted to know, what is DHCP, and is it like boot P?
Right. Well, DHCP, which I showed you how to install that with the TCP/IP protocol, is actually a part of the Windows NT 3.5 server. And this is a great product, because what it does is allow you to automatically configure your TCP/IP addresses on your entire enterprise. So instead of having to have all your users manually type in and know their IP addresses, the DHCP server automatically assigns it every time they start Windows 95. And Windows 95 is integrated with this support, so it automatically works with your existing NT 3.5 servers.
Okay.
And just as a trivia, if somebody wants to know, the acronym DHCP actually stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol.
Okay. And once again, all of those kinds of jargon phrases would be located in where? In the resource kit? In the resource kit. Right. Good answer. Anthony from the 408 area code wanted to know how Win95 will work with older generic VGA cards.
Right. We do have a generic VGA driver that you can use if your specific manufacturing model is not listed in the options there. So any older card should be supported with that VGA option. And of course, if it's not available, your specific manufacturer, Windows 95 will default to generic VGA anyway.
Thank you much. Well, we wanted to also be able to take a few live calls from some of our viewers. And right now we have Wallace on the line from College Station, Texas. Wallace, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, would you ask a question to Dilip or Johnny?
All right, 2 questions. The first one has 3 parts. What is the required minimum physical memory for 95? What's your recommended minimum? And what kind of performance increase could we expect as additional memory over the minimums added to a given workstation?
Okay, thank you. You want to take that, Dilip?
Yep, sure, I could do that. Wallace, the minimum requirements that we say Windows 95 will work with is a 386DX machine with 4 megabytes of RAM. And so 4 megabytes is really the minimum that we require. In addition to that, if you have an 8 megabyte machine, you will get significant performance improvements. If you have more than one application open, for example, you will get a speed up in the way the applications run. So we recommend that you get about 8 megabytes of memory, but if you have a 4 meg machine on a 386DX or better processor, then we'll run just as fine as your Win31 runs today.
Wallace, you had a second part to your question?
Right. If we go up to 16 or 20 or above, what can we expect in additional performance increases?
You will see a significant improvement in your performance. If you double the RAM size, typically you will get a 25 to 50% improvement in your performance. It also lets you do multitasking. If you have many applications open at one time, then the system will not choke up, which it will if you have a 4 megabyte machine.
Okay. Any other parts of your question, Wallace?
Right. My other question was, how long will Windows 3.1.1 be available for new users after Windows 95 goes into production?
We will continue to sell Win31 and Windows for Workgroups 3.1 as long as people want it. We will continue to sell and support both operating systems, including MS-DOS, so all 3 operating systems. But we believe that there's going to be a significant drop-off in sales. I just think that the product itself is so compelling that it's a no-brainer that people will want to upgrade to the operating system.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Wallace.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Real just quick final question for you, Johnny. Okay. Double space, will it be supported in Windows 95?
Yeah, we have terrific support for double space, and now we have a protected mode version of double space. Later on in the show, I'm going to actually demonstrate how you can set up the double space within the Windows 95 UI. Give you an idea to take a look at it and see how it runs.
I think that'll be particularly important for people with laptops and other limited storage situations.
Definitely.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to once again be back later on another segment with Dilip and Johnny. Well, you've done well. You've been with us now for two segments, and this is a really good time for us to take a short break, and then we're going to be moving on to the next section. We still have a lot of material to cover today, and as you can tell, Windows 95 is feature-rich, and Traincast is a feature-rich learning experience for you. Remember that during the show, you can continue to call with your questions, and the number to call is 206-635-7066. We will stop taking questions on that line at the end of the show, but there are plenty of excellent resources available for you to get in-depth answers to your questions. Watch this.
To get a program guide for Microsoft TV with information on additional business-to-business television programs from Microsoft, email us at mstv@microsoft.com or call 800-597-3200. Outside the United States, contact your local Microsoft subsidiary. If you'd like to subscribe to our electronic Windows 95 newsletter, WinNews, send Internet email to enews@microsoft.nwnet.com with the words "Subscribe WinNews" as the only text in your message. WinNews file sections can also be found on most major online services and networks. To order a videotape of today's show, call 800-597-3200. We'll be back with more of the Windows 95 Traincast in just a few minutes. Our Traincast question and answer line is still open, and we invite you to call at 206-635-7066. Microsoft's Windows 95 Traincast is sponsored in part by Dell Computer Corporation.
Welcome back to Microsoft's Windows 95 Traincast. If you are just joining us, we have already covered two important areas that you will not want to miss. Videotapes of this program are available for Microsoft TV and can be ordered by calling 1-800-597-3200. As you know, Windows 95 is going to be the largest single technology change in the history of computing. And you, as IS professionals, are really going to be on the front lines of that process. I hope that over the next several broadcasts that you keep a running list of your questions and of your interests so that you can drill down into that. Now, one of the mysteries surrounding previous Windows version is what really goes on during the time that Windows is starting or sometimes doesn't start. It's during this critical boot-up phase that the most support-intensive problems occur. Windows 95 has been designed to minimize startup problems and provides built-in tools for troubleshooting them. In Johnny Lindsey's next segment, he will step us through the boot process and instruct us on how to use the built-in diagnostic tools Windows 95 provides to quickly solve workstation configuration problems.
In the previous segment of our show, we upgraded Windows for Workgroups to Windows 95. However, setup is not quite complete at this point. We're going to continue our demonstration here by completing the setup process. This incorporates the first boot of Windows 95, where we reboot the machine, and then it has to do a number of features in order for Windows 95 setup to be complete. And we'll walk you through each one of those and show you what Windows 95 is doing. The second part of this segment of our show, we'll actually look at troubleshooting the boot problems. We'll go through a typical boot, and then we'll look at the tools to show you how to troubleshoot that booting problem. So at this point, we're going to begin by finishing our setup. Where we left off on the Pentium, on the Dell Pentium, we're still at the finishing setup screen. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Finish button, and in setup will automatically restart my machine. You'll notice it powers down, and we're going to boot back up into Windows 95 this time. There are a few steps it does here. It modifies your boot partition to boot using the Windows 95 boot files. It also saves your old MS-DOS extension files, IOSys, MS-DOS-sys, command.com, configsys, and autoexec.bat. They all get saved to a .dos extension. So you always have your old MS-DOS boot files as well. At this point on the screen, we see Windows 95. It says, getting ready to run Windows 95 for the first time. There's many things that are occurring behind the scenes here. For security, for your users, we just leave this one screen up so that your users aren't confused with what's happening in the background. They don't see the drivers and TSRs that are loading. In this case, we have more drivers that will be loading than what you're used to in Windows 3.1, so don't be surprised if the Windows 95 boot takes just a little bit longer than it did under Windows 3.1. Again, the screen will always be moving. In this case, you see the Windows logo in the bottom left corner of the screen, and it's actually highlighting back and forth to let you know that the setup process is continuing. If you notice that it pauses for a long period of time, you might want to check and see if your hard drive is running to make sure that the setup process is still occurring. In the background here, vmm32.vxd is being created. If you're familiar with Windows 3.1, vmm32.vxd is very similar to the win386.exe file we had in Windows 3.1. A number of files are going to be combined to create this vmm32.vxd. All of these files will be located in the Windows System subdirectory and then in a vmm32 subdirectory under that. All of these files are combined into one file called vmm32.vxd. This is done so that this file can load faster from one file rather than having them load from separate files. Now, if you do have a network installation where these files will be located on the server, these files will not be combined because there's no benefit, no performance benefit to doing that on a network. Another thing that's occurring at this point is your INI settings are also being converted to registry entries. Your Windows INI settings, your system INI settings are all being converted. This was also done during the installation process that we showed earlier. So during the entire setup process, your registry is being built. Your existing Windows 3.x groups are also converted to folders. So if you had Windows 3.1 and you had a number of groups located there, they're now going to be placed in what we call the Start Menu folder. We'll demonstrate that a little bit later in our show. Within those folders that will be created, there'll be a number of program items that you saw in Windows 3.1 are now converted to what we call shortcuts. And again, we'll show you a little bit of these later in our show. One of the last things it'll do during this boot up process is to rename files to their original names. During the setup process, we were running Windows for Workgroups 3.11. In order to run Windows at that point, we had a number of files in use that we could not update. Well, now we can because we're still booting up the machine. So we'll go ahead and update those files, change their names as appropriate to Windows 95 files. At this point, Windows 95 has finished loading the shell, and it's given me a logon dialog box to log onto the network. Here I'll go ahead and choose OK to go ahead and log into the NT domain. Once it does that, it actually begins to set up my hardware. And here it's setting up my plug-and-play devices. This is where it actually looks on my machine to find out what plug-and-play devices I have installed in my machine, loads the appropriate drivers for them, configures those plug-and-play devices automatically, and then allows me to use them. Now, with some plug-and-play hardware, it may require a reboot this first boot process time in order for the plug-and-play card to be initialized. The next thing you see is a dialog box letting you know what Windows 95 setup is doing. It first begins to convert the programs to the Start menu, as we mentioned earlier. Converting shortcuts that I had, they were originally program items under Windows for Workgroups, now making them into shortcuts and group files that I can access from my Start menu bar in just a moment. A lot of these programs that you'll see coming up here will be wizards, and I can easily walk through them as it shows me. These particular components that you're seeing on the screen right now are all located in the registry in a key called Run Once. In a moment I'll show you where the Run Once key is in the registry. You can actually add your own files to the Run Once key during the setup process or before you begin setup in a batch file, and it will automatically run that along with these other default Windows 95 programs that are in the Run Once key. So you can actually run, for example, a setup of MS Office automatically to perform it during the first boot of Windows 95 after setup. At this point we're going to go back to the Pentium, and you'll see that it's actually brought up another wizard. Allow me to set the date and time properties, and I'll go ahead and do that now. You'll notice it shows me a map of the world, and I want to choose my time zone that I'm located in. And here I'll go ahead and choose Pacific time, and I'll check the date and time as well, and that looks okay. The next screen that we see is the Microsoft Exchange setup wizard. Microsoft Exchange is the new mail client that's built into Windows 95. At this point it's going to allow me to go ahead and complete setting up the Microsoft Exchange program. Now you will not see this dialog box if you did not choose Microsoft Exchange in the custom configuration screen during the setup process. At this point it asks me if I've set up Microsoft Exchange before, and it's going to allow me to go through and create it. For our demonstration here I'm going to go ahead and choose cancel, but you would just normally walk through another wizard that sets you up through Exchange if you want it. Ask me if I'm sure that I want to cancel the setup of Exchange. For right now I'll say yes. I can always go back and set it up later inside of Windows 95. The final wizard dialog box that we would see during the initial boot process would be to add a new printer. In this case, since we're upgrading Windows for workgroups, Windows 95 automatically upgrades your existing printers and doesn't prompt you for the wizard. If we were to do an install from MS-DOS to a new directory, you would see that printer wizard here. At this point I'm going to go ahead and choose OK on the screen because it has finished configuring my system and now wants to restart so that my plug-and-play changes can take effect. So I'll choose OK. Windows 95 will again reboot my machine. At this point Windows 95 has rebooted my machine. You'll notice this was much faster because it did not have to go through some of the boot process it did during the initial boot. Once again I have the logon screen, and I will go ahead and log on to the Microsoft network. Then it loads the Windows 95 shell and tells me it's going to finalize the settings for my computer. Again, setting up the plug-and-play devices. The final screen that I'll see is the Welcome to Windows 95 screen. Now here's where you can actually perform some of the nice functions of Windows 95. We have the Windows Tour, and if I choose Windows Tour you'll see that it brings up a dialog box that lets me walk through some of the common features of Windows 95. This is a good starting tool for your users so they can learn how to use Windows 95. You'll see they can choose an option to learn how to start a program, how to explore the hard drive, how to find a file, and how to switch between windows within Windows 95. A good introductory process. I'll go ahead and choose Exit to exit back out of the tour. And it brings me back to the Welcome to Windows 95 screen. Another option that I have here is the What's New button. When I choose that, it actually tells me some of the new features using the Windows 95 help screens. So once again, I can go through some of these help features to let me know a little bit more about how to start programs. Where did my program groups go? What happened to File Manager? Answer some of the common questions Windows 3.1 users may have about Windows 95. Once again, I'll go ahead and close down this help screen, and I come back to the Welcome to Windows 95 screen. One of the final options I have is to do online registration. This is a very nice feature of Windows 95 that allows you to go ahead and quickly register your information about your Windows 95 product with Microsoft. What it'll do is it'll ask you if you have a modem and let you install a modem if you do, and you can go ahead and send in all your information about yourself, about what kind of computer you have, and process that. At this point, because we do not have a modem on this particular machine, we won't be able to run the online registration. However, when I do install a modem, it will ask me if I want to go ahead and register with Microsoft. So at this point on the machine, I'm going to go ahead and choose Close to close out the Welcome to Windows 95 machine. And it prompts me to let me know that the registration wizard could be run. And now I'm in the Windows 95 user interface. We've completed the original initial boot after setup. It's configured all my plug-and-play devices, It's loaded my network drivers, and now I'm ready to actually use Windows 95 for the first time. At this point, we're going to look at a typical boot process that would normally happen anytime you start your machine with Windows 95. So we're going to detail a step-by-step boot process, just as we did a step-by-step setup process earlier. At this point, I'll go back to the Pentium machine, and I'm going to shut it down so that we can do a reboot. So I'll choose Start and then Shut Down. You'll notice there's a number of options here. There's a shut down the computer, and there's a restart the computer option as well. At this point, since I want to do a reboot, I'll go ahead and choose Restart. and then choose yes. Windows 95 will save any changes that I've made, and it will begin the rebooting process. At this point, a number of things will happen when we boot up the machine that you will not see on your screen. And I'll detail some of these things that are happening. At that point, I'll hit a keystroke, and you'll be able to walk through the step-by-step boot up process. The first thing that's going to happen when I turn on the machine is it's going to do something called bootstrapping. If you're familiar with MS-DOS or the Intel architecture, you'll know what bootstrapping is. This is the way to get your computer up and running. Now, some changes with Windows 95. If you have a plug-and-play BIOS, the BIOS will automatically configure any plug-and-play cards at that point in time. Now, if you do not have a plug-and-play BIOS, what we call a non-plug-and-play BIOS, then the cards will stay uninitialized until Windows 95 can handle them. So at this point, I'm going to turn on the machine and boot it up for the first time. I'll also make sure that I hit the keystroke that will properly get us into a step-by-step process so that we can see it. Now, normally you won't be able to see the step-by-step process. You'll just have the logo screen. Okay, at this point, the master boot record will locate the bootable partition. It found that okay, and then the boot sector will call a file called io.sys. This is similar to the IOSys in MS-DOS. However, this one is made specifically for Windows 95. io.sys will locate where it should load the start menu. We'll also look at a number of other files, and we'll go through each of the processes that IOSys will load. At this point on the screen, you'll actually see the Microsoft Windows 95 startup menu. In a later segment of our show, we'll detail this just a little bit more. Right now, I'm going to go down to step number 5, which is step-by-step confirmation, and choose that. That way we can walk through what's happening. The first option of IOSys is it's going to load a minimal FAT file system. This is so that we can read other files on the hard drive. Now it's going to begin to start loading TSRs as needed. And it's going to prompt me in the step-by-step process whether or not to load these TSRs. Another file that it loads is a file called msdos.sys. Once again, this was a file that was used under MS-DOS in previous versions. However, with Windows 95, MS-DOS-sys is only a text file. It contains only essential data for how the IOSys will load Windows. You will notice that it has two sections, an options section and a path section. And you can edit the MS-DOS-sys for your own functionality. The details about what entries you can put into the MS-DOS-sys will be located in the Windows 95 resource kit. At this point, we'll continue loading so that you can see each of the options that Windows 95 sys will do. The first is to load the double-space driver. So it's waiting for input for me to load double-space. I'll go ahead and say yes, because at this point I don't have any type of compression, but in the future I may want it to load. If the double-space driver loads and does not find a double-space drive, it will automatically unload itself from memory. The next option will be to process the registry. And the registry is read for some of the real mode components that need to take place. Certain things like double buffering. If you have a SCSI device, you may need the double buffering to load for your hard drive access to work properly. Also, this is the point where it looks for hardware profiles. A hardware profile is an option where you can have multiple types of configurations on one machine. This will be especially beneficial for things like laptops, where you have a docking station and then you have it undocked. You will have different hardware between the two. Windows 95 will recognize the different hardware and will load the appropriate hardware profile so it knows what drivers to load and what not to load while you're docked or undocked. At this point, I will go ahead and tell it yes to process the system registry. This is where it goes ahead and loads any of these key double buffering hardware profiles or some real mode network drivers. The next thing Windows 95 will do is ask to create a startup log file. On the first 3 boots, Windows 95 creates this file called bootlog.txt. We'll discuss this in detail in the troubleshooting section in just a moment. However, keep in mind that during this boot process, the bootlog text will be created the first 3 times you boot your machine. After that, it will be off by default. Therefore, in subsequent boots, after your 4th boot, you'll want to actually go through this option and tell it to create the bootlog text for troubleshooting. I'll go ahead and say yes here to allow it to create the bootlog text. The next option is to process your startup device drivers. This is your config sys file. Now some people may think, well, I thought this was Windows 95, we no longer needed DOS or real mode drivers. Why the config sys? This is basically for backwards compatibility. Any drivers that are needed for real mode programs, such as MS-DOS applications, can still be loaded in the config sys. Also, we have a number of default values for the config sys. If you want higher values for some of your applications, you can go ahead and add those to the entry, and if they are higher than the defaults, Windows 95 will load them properly. Also, if you happen to have a third-party memory manager, it can also be loaded here in the config sys. At this point, I'll go ahead and say yes, and we'll walk through some of the entries that are loaded by default. It asks me if I want to do a DOS equal UMB. This is very similar to the F8 process in MS-DOS 6.0 and higher, where you could actually walk through your config sys and autoexec bat, and that's what I'll be doing here. DOS equal high is another component located in my config sys. HiMemSys is also loading from the config sys. A memory manager, EMM386.exe, is loading from the config sys as well. The setver program, which will be necessary for some applications that expect a certain version of MS-DOS. Setver will report that proper version to them to fool them into thinking we're running that current version. Double buffering may be necessary for certain hard drives, and I'll go ahead and load that as well. And of course there's the IFS help.sys that we used to have in Windows for Workgroups. This just allows us to load the protected mode file system. It's a stub that sits in real mode memory to do that. The next option is to go ahead and process your autoexec.bat. And again, this is for backwards compatibility. There are a number of pathing and prompt and environment variables, TSRs you may want to go ahead and load for your DOS-based applications. And that will be fine. You can go ahead and place them in the autoexec. Once again, neither the config sys nor the autoexec are necessary for Windows 95 itself. They could load without them. They would load some defaults, such as HiMemSys, which is necessary, the setver program we talked about. They would also load default environments, such as a path to the Windows directory. These are all defaults that do not require config and autoexec for them to properly process. We'll go ahead and step through the autoexec here on the Pentium by saying yes. You'll notice there are some components that are already rimmed out here on this Pentium. It calls a batch file, which is no longer necessary. Does the echo off command, again, no longer necessary, but we'll go ahead and say yes for backwards compatibility. And there's a number of TSRs and device drivers that we're stepping through here. Just a typical autoexec.bat that you may have on your machine. Now, one of the things you might want to do is to go ahead and delete some of the entries in your autoexec that you no longer need. For example, if you had some older network drivers that were not rimmed out by setup, you'll want to go ahead and remove them from the autoexec. It may be that you can delete the entire autoexec, and that will be fine. I'm going to go ahead and finish walking through the autoexec here. You'll notice it has a path, and if I want to have anything other than the default Windows and Windows Command COM, I want to have a path in my autoexec. A set temp statement. Windows 95 will have a default set temp statement. However, if you would like to have your own, a different directory, you can do that. And then the final option is to actually process win.com. And this will be automatic with Windows 95. It will no longer leave you at the command prompt. It will automatically execute win.com. This is where it loads the 32-bit protected mode Windows 95. So I'll go ahead and say yes here. A final option is to load all Windows drivers. And this is an option where I can actually still load a very scaled down version of Windows for troubleshooting if I say no. At this point, we want to go ahead and do a typical boot, so I'll say yes. Windows 95 will then begin to, it'll call the vmm32.vxd. vmm32 actually begins to load any internal drivers that are built into that file. If you happen to have a third-party driver loaded, vmm32 will try and load that as well. It looks for a number of areas to try and load this. First of all, it looks in the Windows System vmm32 subdirectory. If it finds any VXD files there that it does not have in its own internal file, it will load that as well. Also, for backwards compatibility, it loads any device statements in the system INI that do not conflict with ones that have already been loaded from vmm32. This is so if you install an application that was made for Windows 3.1, it would have written a device statement into your system INI. Well, now Windows 95 will go ahead and process that as well. The next step is the processor of your machine is switched into protected mode. And here's where your VXDs are now initialized. You'll be able to see these VXDs initialized in the boot log text, and we'll take a look at this in just a moment. You also have a number of dynamic VXDs that are loaded, and these are VXDs that can be loaded and unloaded as necessary. For example, when I insert a PCMCIA device, a VXD for that driver will load automatically. When I remove it, it will automatically unload. So typically this will apply to plug-and-play devices. The final step of Windows 95 before loading the actual shell is to load the core components. These are core Windows libraries that we've had both in Windows 3.1 and now we've got some new ones in Windows 95. There's the typical kernel 386exe, the GDI, and now a GDI 32.dll, the user files. Some other resources such as fonts also get loaded at this point. Your win.ini file will be examined for any entries that are necessary for applications. The run once key will be processed, and your shell will be loaded at this point. We're going to go back to the screen now, and you'll see that we've actually gotten to the shell where it prompts me to log into the network. Once again, I'll say OK, and my desktop features will be loaded. Once again, I'll get the Welcome to Windows 95 screen. This will continue to appear every time so that you can take the Windows tour, go to what's new, or perhaps do the online registration. If you want this to stop coming up during the boot process, you'll want to go to the option here at the bottom, the checkbox that says Show this welcome screen next time you start Windows, and just deselect it. When you choose Close, you won't have that option in that dialog box anymore. One other note you want to think about with the logon screen is that logon screen will vary depending on what network client you have loaded and what primary network logon is selected. Typically, you'll have at least one logon when you start Windows 95, even if you have no network. This is what logs you into the machine. If you have a password set up, you'll want to type in your password and whatever username you're using. If you have a network installed, as we do here with the Microsoft network, that may be the first logon box that you see. If that username matches your Windows logon username, you'll only get the one dialog box. This will apply to any networks. In this case, if I have the client for Microsoft networks, the client for Windows networks, client for network networks, excuse me, and the typical Windows logon, all three of them need to have the same username and password. I'll only have to type it in once, and it'll automatically log me into the other two. If you want to change the order in which that comes up, you can actually go into Control Panel, and I'll do that through My Computer. Then I'll double-click on Control Panel. And finally, in Control Panel, I'll click on the Network icon. Here in Networks, you'll notice we have Client for Microsoft Networks, Client for NetWare Networks. You also notice another dialog box that we haven't yet talked about. That's the Primary Network Logon. This tells it which logon to come up first when you start your machine. I can actually change this to the Client for Microsoft Networks, the Client for NetWare Networks, or the Windows logon. Each one of those, again, will be the first one that comes up, and if the username and password matches, it will again automatically load the other two automatically behind the scenes. So you'll be logged onto your network automatically. I'll go ahead and set it to the Windows logon so that you'll be able to see that the next time we boot. And choose OK. At this point, it's going to ask me to restart my computer to make this change apply the next time I start. I'll say no at this point. One of the new features you may notice with Windows 95 is that if you leave a screen open when you exit, it will automatically start up the next time with that same screen open. In this case, I have Control Panel open, and so the next time I start Windows 95, if I shut down with Control Panel still open, it will reboot with Control Panel open again. This is a feature where we assume that if you left something open when you exited, you still want that when you come back up the next time. Another feature with Windows 95 startup or boot process is what we call the startup folder. This is very similar to the startup group in Windows 3.1. What it does is every time you boot Windows 95, it automatically loads programs in the startup folder. I'm going to demonstrate how you can add something here on our Pentium machine, add something to the startup folder. I'll first go down to the Start menu, which is located here at the bottom of my screen. I choose the Start button to begin, and about halfway up is a Settings option. Settings generally controls any settings on your computer and your taskbar. this case, this is a taskbar function, so I will choose the taskbar option. In the taskbar properties, I have two menu selections. I have the taskbar options, and I can also pull up the Start Menu folder. And Start Menu Programs gives you the option to customize your Start Menu. Here's where I can choose Add to add something to my Start Menu. You'll notice that this is a wizard screen, which means I can actually walk back and forth between the selections I make in these wizards. So if I decide I don't want to load that program, I can always choose the back button or cancel to get out of it. At this point, I'll choose Browse to find the file that I want to load. In this example, I'm going to want to load the clock every time I start Windows 95. I know that clock is in the Windows directory, so I'll go find that. Double-clicking on the Windows folder shows me the files in my Windows directory. And I see that clock is located here and can double-click on that, and it puts that command line into my Browse button automatically. So now all I do is choose Next and tell it what folder I want to put that in. For startup, I want to make sure I select the startup folder and then choose Next. At this point, I can give it a name for the shortcut, whatever name I really want to call this. I'll say this is my own clock, and I'll call it my own clock. Really, these are friendly names that you can use, so it doesn't really matter what name you choose. It will automatically know to load the clock program. And I'll choose Finish. Once I choose OK on taskbar properties, the next time I restart my computer, you'll see it'll load the clock automatically. Another feature of Windows 95 that we've mentioned upon before is the Run Once program. That's something that Windows 95 Setup uses to finish the setup process during initial boot. Once again, you can also use this Run Once key in the registry to load programs. Let's say, for example, you want to set up an application automatically on one of your users' machines. You may want to use this Run Once key. What will happen is Windows 95 will look in the Run Once key, see that you have a setup program, and run that setup program. For more details on using the Run Once key, you might want to consult the Windows 95 Resource Kit. Finally, another option that's available here in Windows 95 is User Profiles. User Profiles are a very feature-oriented functionality where you can have multiple users on one machine. This is a demand our customers have been asking for some time. And here with Windows 95, we'll be able to do this. We'll talk a little bit more about user profiles in a future Traincast show. At this point, just note that when the user logs in, it automatically loads customized desktop settings so they can have their own icons and they can have their own shortcuts and links to other applications on their screen. At this point, the boot process has now been completed, and we walk through a typical boot, what you would normally see. Now, to the user who boots up, all they will see is the Windows 95 logo screen, and then their logon screen in the Windows 95 user interface. This is because we no longer want Windows 95 to show the user what's happening. It's better for them to just see the logo screen and know that it's loading. Now, however, if you want to see what's happening, you can always use one of our function keys. First thing we'll talk about this section of troubleshooting is the boot menu. To access the boot menu, actually boot the machine, and when it says starting Windows 95, you press the F8 key. I'll go ahead and do that here by shutting down Windows 95 and having it restart my machine. At this point, you'll normally only have a few seconds during the starting Windows 95 screen to press that F8 before it goes to the Windows 95 logo. So make sure you're watching the screen during the reboot so that you can do that. At this point in time, our machine is rebooting, and I'll get ready to press the F8 key when we see starting Windows 95. And now you see the Microsoft Windows 95 startup menu. One of the things you may want to note is that this will automatically appear if a previous boot did not complete. So if my previous boot up failed, it will automatically show this, bring up this startup menu without me having to press the F8 menu. We'll also let you know that because Windows 95 did not boot, this is the reason it has that menu located there. So we'll take a look at this menu and some of the options that we do have available. The first option is normal, and that's going to be a typical boot up. Actually, you probably won't ever be selecting this option because this indicates everything's working okay. So unless there was a problem booting before, you probably will not want to select normal, but it is an option here located. We'll go ahead and skip normal because you've seen a normal boot. The second option is logged, and this is the file that creates the bootlog.txt. It's really a typical normal boot. However, you do get to create the bootlog.txt. As I mentioned earlier, the boot log text is only created the first 3 times your machine is booted up. From then on, it's no longer turned on by default, so we don't have a boot log text. This is a way to force it if you're troubleshooting. I'm going to go ahead and do a bootlog.txt file. And once it boots into Windows 95, we'll actually examine the bootlog.txt and see how you can use that to help you troubleshoot. Again, remember, this is just a typical normal boot, so if you're not actually doing, if you do have problems booting up, it may be that you choose this option, but you're still not able to boot into Windows. Your bootlog.txt keeps a running track of what's happening. Therefore, you can still, even though Windows 95 does not load all the way into the protected mode operating system, you can still look at this bootlog.txt file and see what was the last thing it processed before it locked up. This will typically give you a good idea as to what happened. At this point, Windows 95 has loaded, and I'll be able to log onto my network again. Now again, typically if you are having a boot problem and you need to use the bootlog, you may not get this far in your system, but you can certainly have a bootlog.txt file created. I will want to go ahead and edit my bootlog.txt file at this point so I can see what has happened. To do this, I'm going to actually find the bootlog.txt file by opening up my computer. And within my computer, I'll double click on my C drive, and it opens up automatically to my root directory. Here's where I can scroll down and find the bootlog.txt file. The bootlog.txt file is a hidden file, so you won't be able to see it automatically. So one of the other options I have to change here in Explorer is to turn on the option to show all files, not just the regular system files. Now I'm able to see all my files in my root directory, and here's my bootlog.txt file. If I double click on it, it will automatically open up in Notepad. You're going to notice in the bootlog.txt there's a number of options listed here. The first you'll see is loading device and loading success. These first entries are from your config.sys and autoexec.bat. These are real mode components. You'll notice HiMemSys is the first loading device. Right below that you have a load success for HiMemSys as well. You'll see a number of other components that loaded in the config.sys. And then we start loading VXDs. The first thing you see is VMM32. And we talked about how VMM32 is the first component that gets loaded. Then we'll see a number of other VXDs that are loading, and you'll see load successes. What you'll want to be looking for here in the config.sys is something that has a loading that does not have a load success. Let's say, for example, my COM-buff device did not load properly. If I load that VXD and I do not see a load success for that same device, that indicates a problem. You may actually even see a load failure to let you know that it knew it could load the device, but it continued on. The bootlog.txt can be quite lengthy, so be sure you scroll through all looking for failures or possible devices that did not load. The other section actually points to what we call initializing these devices. We've loaded devices, now we must initialize the VXDs. Once again, there'll be an entry that says it's initializing. This is indicated by this syscrit init entry. It tells you which device it's initializing. Then it tells you if it's been successful. Once again, look for things that are initializing that do not show success, or if you even have a failure option. That will sometimes let you know where the problem is in booting, and you should be able to correct it by removing that device and perhaps reinstalling. Therefore, you can see how the bootlog.txt can be very helpful. Do keep a few things in mind. It is a hidden file, and it will always be stored in your root directory. One other thing to note is, unlike previous versions of Windows, the bootlog.txt does not append itself each time you boot. It creates a brand new bootlog.txt, and it saves the old bootlog as bootlog.prv, also in the same root directory. We're going to go ahead and shut down this version of Windows 95 again and reboot the computer once again so we can show you some of the other boot options. At this point, our computer is once again booting, and remember the boot process. It's going to load the bootstrap. If we have a plug-and-play BIOS, it's going to initialize those. At this point, I'm going to choose the F8 key once again so that I can see the Windows 95 startup menu. The next option, number 3 on our list, is what we call safe mode. Now you can also get safe mode by pressing the F5 key while it says starting Windows 95. That will automatically load this option. So remember, you can do it through the startup menu or by pressing F5. Safe mode is probably one of the best features of Windows 95 boot up. This is where it loads minimal drivers to get you into Windows 95. When loading safe mode, the config and autoexec, the config.sys and autoexec.bat are both bypassed, so no drivers are loaded from there. So if they were cause you any problems, this will help correct it. One of the other things that is bypassed is the registry. And we've already talked about how key the Windows 95 registry is to loading drivers. In this case, we're going to let all real mode components take over that process. So the registry is only loaded just to get your desktop interface settings and to get to Device Manager. A minimal system.ini file is created that allows us to load Windows. And again, this has just the core components of Windows 95. No third-party drivers are able to load in safe mode. And finally, default settings for your mouse, your keyboard, for your video are loaded properly at this time. So you'll only see VGA, no super VGA driver, no specialized driver for your video card. Just a standard VGA, a standard keyboard, and a standard mouse driver. I'm going to go ahead and load safe mode here on the Pentium so that you'll be able to see it. So I'll choose choice number 3 and press enter. You'll notice again we'll get the Windows 95 screen. One of the nice things here is it'll also take a lot less time to come up because it has to load fewer drivers. Windows 95 is now loading my user interface. And this time I'll be prompted just to log into Windows 95 only. One of the other things you'll note about safe mode is that in the 4 corners of your screen is the safe mode box. This is telling me that I am in safe mode so that you'll know there are typically some applications that will not load because their drivers were not loaded in safe mode. So you may see some possible problems. Windows 95 presents this warning to you to let you know that you're in a diagnostic troubleshooting mode. And of course the safe mode in the 4 corners allows you to recognize that it's also in safe mode. So it's loaded a typical installation, and you'll notice if I was running a higher resolution other than VGA, it would switch down the VGA at that point as well. And here's where I can use some of my troubleshooting tools within protected mode windows to try and determine what caused the problem. You could perhaps look at a boot log text from a previous boot and see perhaps where the problem was. So you can see this is going to correct a number of problems. Incorrect drivers that are loading, say you don't have that hardware loading and the driver is still trying to load. Corrupted files on your machine. We're bypassing a number of these device drivers so they'll load properly. And finally, we're avoiding any resource conflicts. If you have a driver loading that may have an IRQ3 that's conflicting with your COM2 device, we're going to be skipping loading that driver. So we should be able to at least boot up into Windows 95 so you can go into Device Manager and change that setting. We're going to go ahead and power down out of safe mode here. Again, I'll choose the Start menu and choose Shut Down, and I will shut down the computer. At this point, I've rebooted the computer once again. Again, at the starting Windows 95 screen, I'll actually press the F8 key so that it allows me to load my startup menu once again. The next option is going to be very similar to safe mode, and this is safe mode with network support. You'll want to use this whenever you're loading Windows 95 from a server-based setup because you still need to load your network drivers to get access to your server and load its proper files. One thing to note about safe mode with network, if you're able to load safe mode and then you try safe mode with network support and it does not work, it's very likely your problem is with some part of the network components, one of the network drivers. So you'll have narrowed down your troubleshooting right there. At this point, we're not going to walk through safe mode with network support because it pretty much looks similar to what we did in safe mode. The next option available in our startup menu is the step-by-step confirmation. I'm going to demonstrate that here on the screen now. We've actually demonstrated a step-by-step confirmation before in our previous segment of this show where you saw it, we were processing the boot process. Again, I'll allow you to see it here where you see some of the options it allows us to confirm. The first is the double-space driver, and then the registry. And again, I can say yes or no to any of these options. I'll continue to say yes through the boot log text. Then it asks me for the config.sys. In this case, if I say no, it doesn't process any of the device drivers in config.sys. However, one of the things you'll want to notice here is that it still loads default drivers that would typically be loaded from config.sys. However, Windows 95 io.sys file automatically loads these files without requiring a config.sys. So it will still prompt you for these options. The first option you'll see here on the screen is HiMemSys. I'll go ahead and say yes because that's required for Windows. The next option is doublebuff.sys, and this is, again, the double buffer driver for your SCSI hard drives typically. IFS help is needed for networking with Windows 95 and the file system. Setver, typically used for MS-DOS applications. And then it asks me to process my autoexec.bat. Once again, I can say no here and skip the autoexec.bat altogether. Final option asks me to load the graphical user interface. And here's where it runs win.com. And I can actually say no, and it drops me to the command prompt here on my C drive. This is kind of a nice feature because if you don't want to load in protect mode windows, perhaps that's where your problem is once it's starting in protect mode windows. Here I can get into the command prompt and edit any files as necessary. A couple options that can be used here. I can do an edit of my config sys, for example. And I'll do that on the screen right now. If I see a device driver that may be causing a problem, perhaps I think loading DOS into high memory is causing a problem, I can remark that line out, exit out of the config sys and save that file, and then I reboot the machine and it would load it without that the next time I started. The next option that we'll see when we reboot the computer, and I'll go ahead and do that now, we'll pull up the startup menu by choosing the F8 key. Last option you'll see is safe mode command prompt only. What safe mode command prompt only does is this is very similar to safe mode. However, this loads the least amount of drivers of all of these options. And this is probably the key. If none of the other options are working, this should be your last resort here, safe mode command prompt. You'll notice when I select it, it says Windows is bypassing your startup files. It's actually bypassed a number of files. It's bypassed the config sys and autoexec. It did not load HiMemSys or IFS help or setver. It also did not process the registry. If you do have a compression driver that needs to be loaded, that will still be loaded, and that's usually typical to get access to your files. It then leaves me at the C command prompt, and the only thing it adds as far as the environment is my default path so that I can still have access to Windows. So once again, if you determine that it's a real mode component that's causing a problem, causing your machine to lock up, this will bypass that as well and leave you in a command prompt where you can work. The next troubleshooting switch that you can use is actually switches to troubleshoot protected mode operating system functions. Here we use the win.com command and add switches to that to be able to tell Windows 95 not to load certain drivers or devices. This will be helpful if you determine that loading real mode is fine, but something is wrong with protected mode. Now we've already seen the boot log text, and that's another option you want to take into account when troubleshooting protected mode windows. But here on this machine, I'm going to reboot again, and this time I want to start with command prompt only. To do that, I'll be pressing the F8 key when I get starting Windows 95 on my screen, and then I see the startup menu, and I want to choose option number 6, which is command prompt only. That loads my config and autoexec, so I could still run Windows just by typing in win.com. However, at this point, let me show you some of the troubleshooting steps that you can use. But to do that, I'll actually type in win space / question mark. Now this does not run win.com, it only shows us the switches that are available for that particular option. You'll see here there are quite a few. Most of these, if you're familiar with Windows or Windows for Workgroups 3.1 and 3.11, you'll have seen most of these switches already. Typically you'll use a /D, and that's for diagnostic mode, win space / D, and then a colon followed by another letter. The F, X, V, and S are all the same as they were in Windows 3.1. So you want to use the Windows 95 resource kit or even a Windows 3.1 resource kit that tells you a little bit more about what those options do. The two that I want to talk about today are the Enable Safe Mode and the Enable Safe Mode with Networking. Now we've talked about safe mode and what that is. When I type in win space / D colon and then M or N, it will load the protected mode safe mode start. So I've actually processed my config sys and autoexec already, and now I'm going to do a /D colon M. The protected mode starts up without processing the registry, without loading third-party device drivers, and with a minimal system INI to get us up into Windows. This is probably a key to troubleshooting device drivers so that you can get into Windows 95 and still be able to go into Device Manager to disable drivers, or perhaps look at your boot log text to have it determine what the problem was. You'll notice it gives me the dialog box again that tells me Windows 95 is running in safe mode, and I will go ahead and choose OK there. Again, safe mode in all four corners to let you know that you are in safe mode. Some of your applications may not work properly. The Win/D:"N will do the same thing, however it will load your networking drivers again. This is in case you have a server-based setup and you need to get to your network to be able to load Windows. So once again, a couple of new Win.com switches that will allow you to do some more troubleshooting with Windows 95. Another feature of the Windows 95 boot up process is the registry protection that is built into Windows 95. Because the registry is such an important part of Windows 95, we want to make sure that we're always able to load a correct registry. Now, most of the key components as far as your hardware of the registry is built into a file called system.dat. This is located in your Windows directory. Windows 95 will make a backup copy of this file called system.da0, also in the same directory. Both of these files will have hidden system and read-only attributes, so to be able to view them, you will need to use the appropriate commands to view hidden system and read-only files. Also, if you want to edit those files, you'll also need to use the attrib command or an equivalent Windows 95 command to change those attributes. The system.da0 is updated every time you have a successful boot into Windows 95. What this means is if you made a change during Windows 95 that could cause a problem in your registry, the next time you boot up, you've still got a copy of your older registry as system.da0. As a matter of fact, Windows 95 is smart enough during the boot up process that if system.dat cannot load, it will automatically copy system.da0 over to system.dat. Again, because it has your old settings, you'll be able to boot up into Windows 95. So it's smart enough to recover without user intervention. Another registry protection feature that we have is a file called system.first, and that's system.1st. That's created after the very first successful boot into Windows 95. Now, we looked at that earlier where that finished setting up Windows 95. At that point, a system.first is created and stored in your root directory. Now, please note this is different from where your other system registry files were located in the Windows directory. This is in the root. If both the system.dat and the system.da0 are failing and you cannot get into Windows 95, you can copy the system.first over to system.dat in your Windows directory to boot off of your very first configuration. The only disadvantage to this is that you may lose some configuration information you've added after your initial boot. So if you've added any software, changed any of your hardware settings, those changes will need to be done again at this point if you're going back to system.first. Okay? But again, you can see here how the registry should be pretty self-protecting. No user intervention should really be required for most registry problems because it's going to take care of itself. The final boot process option that I would like to show you today is the boot disk, or what we call the startup diskette. This is something we created during the startup process, during the setup process. Allowed me to create a boot up diskette. I'm going to demonstrate this here today by inserting the boot disk and rebooting my machine. So at this point, I'll insert my boot diskette and I'll exit out of Windows 95 on the screen. The reason why you might want to use this startup diskette is because you're having problems actually loading the operating system at all from the hard drive. In this case, perhaps there's a problem with your boot sector, or a problem with your master boot record, or even a problem with the io.sys file. If that's the case, you may not be able to even get to a command prompt to do any editing. That's why we provided you with the startup diskette. In this case, I'm going to demonstrate booting up off the startup diskette here on our Pentium machine. So we'll go ahead and start the boot process. I have the disk in drive A, so it will automatically look to the drive A first before looking to hard drive to boot up. Now again, you remember we created this file during the setup process. We created this whole diskette, and it's got a version of io.sys on there that will automatically load a version of Windows 95 command prompt. It will not go all the way into Windows 95 screen. You'll see we get the starting Windows 95 screen. rather than seeing a logo, it automatically drops me to the A drive so that I can now edit some files. I'm going to do a directory on this diskette so you can see what typical files are located on this diskette. You'll see we do have a copy of drive space bin. In case you do have compression, you can still access your compressed drives from this boot diskette. We also have a version of the real mode registry editor called regedit.exe if you needed to make some changes to your registry. Some of the more important ones is we have the sys command, which allows you to resystem your hard drive so that it has the Windows 95 system files. This is important because if you do something that modifies your system files, let's say you happen to install DOS 6 on top of Windows 95, it's no longer going to be able to boot to Windows 95. You can use this sys command to reset your hard drive so it's booting to Windows 95. We also have a version of ScanDisk, and I'll run that version for you so you can see it on the screen. You'll see this is very similar to the DOS 6.0 and above versions of ScanDisk. Takes a little bit longer to process. You'll see it's going to check my hard drive for any known problems. Do a surface scan of the hard drive as well. And this will scan all drives, and it will then ask me if I want to do an actual surface scan, and I can choose yes if I want to. At this point I'll say no. Again, I'll exit, and you can do ScanDisk on any of your drives. If you feel like there may be a problem with your hard drive, I could do ScanDisk space C:, and it's going to check that drive as well. A good troubleshooting step if you think there may be hardware problems, your drive is not functioning properly, perhaps you've got some bad sectors, this should be able to correct those for you. In this case, we've actually found a problem on our machine. ScanDisk detected an invalid long file name entry. However, this version of ScanDisk will not be able to fix long file names, but you'll still be able to boot into Windows 95 to correct that. And I'll say no to the surface scan for now. So you can see now we've examined the boot process actually in two ways. We've seen the initial boot after setup, and we've also seen a typical boot. We've also examined a number of new troubleshooting tools that can be used by IS managers to troubleshoot boot problems. Next, we'll actually take a look at the user interface. We'll get our hands on the UI and show you how that works, and then we'll look at some of the tools available inside of Windows 95 to help you manage those computers.
That was super, Johnny. I know that many corporate installations of Windows will require drivers or TSRs that need to be loaded in real mode before Windows starts. You mentioned that autoexec.bat and config.6 are maintained for backwards compatibility. Is this where they would be loaded?
That's right. If you do have any TSRs or device drivers that you need to load, go ahead and have them loaded either from the config.sys or autoexec so that they're always processed when you boot your computer. And Windows, any applications that you use that take advantage of it, usually MS-DOS based applications, we'll be able to use those.
Okay, you holding up okay over there?
Doing fine. Doing good.
Okay, we'll take a little break while we do a little bit of housekeeping here. The Windows 95 engineers have been very busy and have sent us some more viewer questions. However, before we get to those questions, I would like to remind viewers of the special Traincast computer system giveaway. Now, on the screen right now, you're going to see some rules, and as systems engineers, you know that we have some very specific kinds of information we have to disseminate. Nothing as complicated as these rules. So basically, Microsoft people aren't eligible. My mom, fiance aren't eligible, and anyone still running Radio Shack Model 1 computers are probably not eligible. But we hope that you will enter the contest. During each Traincast, we're going to ask viewers to call this special phone number to answer a question that relates to the topic of each show. The first 100 callers who give the correct answer to our question will receive free a copy of Microsoft Encarta. Is that Encarta 95?
That is correct.
Okay, Encarta 95. Everyone that calls will have their name entered into a grand prize drawing for a chance to win a new multimedia computer system provided by Dell Corporation. The winner of this system will be announced at the end of our last show. Remember, in order to win, you must be watching the final show. The contest question is, what are the 3 phases of the Windows 95 wizard-driven setup program? The question again is, what are the 3 phases of the Windows 95 wizard-driven setup program? Now, please remember to leave your name, address, and phone number when you call. Good luck to you. Now, why don't we go back to take some of our viewer questions. John from Houston has a question for you, and you might want to go back over to the demo area to look at this. His question is, will Win95 support multiple net cards in a single machine? One a token RIN, another, for instance, an Ethernet card.
Yeah, we can certainly support that. And yeah, why don't I go over to my 486 and I'll show you how we can use that. Go back over here to my demo area. And on the 486, what I'm going to do is actually go into the network option and I'm going to install a couple net cards. Now, I don't actually have these net cards installed in my machine, so we won't actually do it, but you'll be able to see where to install those. So I'll go to my computer and then I'll choose Control Panel. From Control Panel, once again, I'll go into the network option. And this is just double clicking on each one of these. And then I'll choose Add. And from here I could choose Adapter and choose Add. And you'll see there's a number of manufacturers listed here. I'll select one of the common ones you might have, the Novell NE2000 compatible, and choose OK. At that point, you see I automatically have that adapter installed, and if I scroll down a little bit, it's automatically added additional protocols, each of my installed protocols, to that network card as well. If I wanted to add a third and a fourth network adapter, I could do that from here as well. So you can see we can have multiple adapters of different types, one Ethernet, one token ring, and they would all work together on a single workstation. Elliot?
Okay, thank you very much, Johnny. Just one point of clarification on that. Do you have to reboot after that install?
Yes, I would have to reboot the machine if I were going to install a new network adapter.
Okay. Dilip, why don't we hit you with the next question? John from Pensacola, Florida, wants to know what role will the NT workstation play in a network once Windows 95 is released?
Well, Windows NT is a 32-bit operating system as well, and what we are positioning it to be is the server end of the client-server configuration. So Windows NT will be the server operating system, Windows 95 will be the client operating system. I would like to take this opportunity to point out there are some differences. Though they're both 32-bit operating systems, they're both multitasking, multi-threaded environments, there are differences. For example, Windows 95 will work only on Intel x86 architectures. Windows NT is a portable operating system. Windows NT will work on RISC machines, which Windows 95 will not. Also, if you want a secure operating system, Windows NT is a C2 level secure operating system. Windows 95 is not. We will talk about security through Windows 95 in future versions. So there are differences, and the role for Windows NT does not go away.
Okay. We have another caller who's live on the line. John from Houston. Are you there, John?
I'm here.
Would you like to ask your question? I know you wanted to know some information about Windows 95 over Novell DOS.
That's correct. I want to know if you can load it over Novell DOS, then if you can run Novell DOS as a DOS for it.
Yes, John. Actually, Windows 95 can be installed on a machine that has Novell DOS installed. We will not touch any of the DOS files, and you will be able to use many of the utilities of Novell DOS. Of course, there may be a few compatibility issues. You might just want to try testing, especially adding setver information if you have a program that's required for a specific version of DOS.
Okay. Thank you very much, John. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I also wanted to know about optimizing the disk, where you put the files together, eliminating some file pointers. It's disk opt under Novell DOS.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
A disk optimizer.
The question with disk optimization is you want to be careful in using long file names. Make sure that the utility that you are using supports long file names and that it won't hurt those file names during that process.
Is there one on Win95?
Yes, Windows 95 has ScanDisk and a defragmentation program that will work on long file names.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Eric in Phoenix has a question about the availability of learning products, particularly about CBT products.
Well, Eric, we are working with a lot of CBT manufacturers right now to come up with tutorials that independent vendors can market. But we also include with the product, and Johnny will show you, we also include a self-tutorial that people can go through to understand the program. So as we come closer to launch, there will be more and more of these that come out. I would just say stay tuned to Win News, stay tuned to Traincast, and as these products come onto the market, we'll make them more available.
We have a question from Scott. Scott was interested in, when doing a shared install, do I still need to load RM net drivers?
Yeah, do real mode drivers need to load? Actually, Windows 95 will load its own real mode network drivers to get to a server, and then we will replace them with protected mode drivers once we have access to that server. So we transition from real mode to protected mode, which is a great feature. Gives you that speed benefit even though you're running a server-based setup.
John from Houston has probably what I would call the reality and keep your job question. He wants to know, is it a good idea to back up critical data before doing an upgrade to Windows 95?
Well, you know, no matter how good and robust the software, I think it's always a good idea to back up data. It's like saying, well, should I wear my seatbelt before getting into a car? You should wear your seatbelt before getting into a tank. So I think it's a good idea. It's not, the operating system is robust. It's not going to corrupt any data, and we're testing it intensely, but I still think it's a good idea.
Okay, and one very quick last question is Sam, who's in an auditorium in Gardner, Mass., wants to know, if I do a network install of Windows 95 onto a portable and then take the portable out into the field, will he need to add new drivers with them?
If you will be installing a new net card while out in the field, you'll certainly want to take your diskettes, and you can install from there. However, keep in mind that if it's like a PCMCIA adapter, that driver will most likely already be installed.
Thank you much, Johnny. Well, that wraps up our question and answer time for this section. As Johnny prepares for the next section, I would like to remind you that after the broadcast ends, our Windows 95 engineers will stop taking calls on the Traincast line. We will have one more question and answer section, so if you have not called in your question, this is a great time to do it. The phone number is 206-635-7066. When you first boot Microsoft Windows 95, you know immediately that the old world of running Windows running on top of MS-DOS is no more. The user interface defines the user's overall experience more than in any other part of the operating system. In today's final segment, Johnny is going to give us a quick tour of the new interface. He will then show how Microsoft has improved some of the common tasks administrators perform on Windows 3.1 systems.
We've now looked at the setup process of Windows 95. We've gone through a step-by-step process showing you how setup works. We've also looked at the boot process after setup and actually looked at a typical boot as well. At this point, we're going to examine the user interface and show you some of the features and functionalities that the user interface has. The user interface of Windows 95 has a number of new features that will improve productivity for all of the users within your organization. First of all, it's going to provide better ease of use for your users. We've done extensive usability testing here at Microsoft with the Windows 95 interface to find out what makes it work better, what makes your users perform faster, how can they understand Windows better. We've incorporated that into this new user interface. We've also made the interface faster. You can get to the features you need much faster than you could under Windows 3.1. There's also much more flexibility. There are a number of ways you can do things under Windows 95. As well as this ease of use, faster and more flexible interface, there are a number of tools within Windows 95 that you, as an IS manager, can use to assist in configuring and troubleshooting Windows 95. We'll take a look at some of those as well. First, let's look at how the Windows 95 makes some of your common tasks that you did under Windows 3.1 better here in the new user interface. The first thing you'll notice when you start Windows 95 is something we call the taskbar. This is generally going to be located at the bottom of your screen by default. It will contain a Start button, as well as a clock, and any applications that are currently running. The taskbar is a common area for accessing your applications. Here you can start applications using the Start button, and you can keep track of any running applications and switch between them. Now the taskbar is very flexible. You can move and resize it to any need that you have. In this case, I'm going to grab the top of the taskbar, and you'll see that it turns into an up-down arrow. Here I can drag it to be as large as I need, or if I'd prefer to have it smaller, I can drag it once again to be much smaller. Therefore, you have this flexibility for your taskbar to be as large or as small as necessary. I can also move the taskbar around my screen. For example, I could place it on the right-hand side if I prefer to have it there. Once again, I can also resize it by moving to the edge, and you'll see the left-right arrow this time. and I can move it to be as large or as small as desired. And I can move that to any of any part of the screen, the left, right, top, or bottom. I'm going to move it back to the bottom at this point. You'll also notice another feature on the taskbar, and that's the Start button. The Start button can be configured fairly easily within Windows 95. When you highlight the Start button, a tooltip will come on top that says click here to begin. When I click on the Start button, it shows me a number of features and programs that I can run. This is where you'll do most of your programming from Windows 95. Here you can run your applications, you can access the settings within Windows 95, or take advantage of some of the tools such as the Find menu or the Help. In this case, I'm going to show you how I can run an application. I'm going to go to the Programs menu and then highlight Accessories. And you can see as I do that, a new menu opens up for each one I select. In this case, under Accessories, I'm going to choose the WordPad program. This is a new application similar to Write in Microsoft Windows 3.1. I get the title screen for WordPad, and now I can begin to edit in my word processor. I'm going to minimize this, and you'll notice the buttons here at the top right corner of the application. The first one being minimized, the second one being maximized, and then a third new button for Windows 95 is the Close button. At this point I'll choose Minimize. You can see the movement down to the bottom of your screen. Let me do that again so that you can see it. I'll click on it in the taskbar so that Document WordPad opens up, and then I'll minimize it again. And watch carefully as you see it minimized to the bottom of the screen. Therefore, a user won't be confused as to where the application went when they minimized it. This is helpful because a number of users in Windows 3.1 would think they lost their application when they minimized it, when in reality it was just behind another window. So here's how the taskbar can make it easier for users to manage multiple applications. I'll go ahead and start another application. Up in the top corner of my screen, you can see there's a Start button for Microsoft Excel. I'll go ahead and choose Excel, and you'll notice it's also running. Once again, if you look down at the taskbar, you'll see Microsoft Excel -Book 1 listed there. If I want to then switch to WordPad, I can quickly click on that and it pulls up both windows. So you can see how the taskbar allows me to just switch quickly among multiple applications rather than having to use the Alt-Tab keystroke that we used in Windows 3.1. Now if your users are used to Alt-Tab, that will still work just as easily. Once again, I'll Alt-Tab back to WordPad. So you can see how this is very beneficial for using multiple applications within Windows 95. Another feature of the taskbar is that it can also be hidden from the user when they don't want to be using it. I'll show you how to use the Auto Hide feature here. Let me minimize WordPad, and you can see how Excel is taking up most of the screen. However, if I were to drag my taskbar to make it larger, you'll notice it's now taking up 3/4 of the screen and Excel gets much less space. Some users may prefer to have a larger taskbar, but they don't want their applications to lose that space. So what I'm going to do is configure the taskbar. There are a number of ways to do this. I'll go to the Start menu and then choose the Settings option. Under Settings, there's an option to control the taskbar, and I will select that now. Under Taskbar, you'll see there's quite a few options. The first is Always on Top, and that will be turned on by default. This allows the taskbar to always remain on the top of your screen. So I could turn that off here, but a better feature that I'm going to implement here is called Auto Hide. If I choose Auto Hide, I then have the option to actually hide the taskbar when it's not being used and to pull it up automatically. So I'll go ahead and choose OK, and then I'll drag my taskbar up to the size I want it. Now, when I go to another application, you'll notice the taskbar disappears. But the benefit here is if I just move my mouse cursor to the bottom of the screen, the taskbar automatically pops up. So it's a handy feature to go between your taskbar and your existing applications. Once again, I'm going to resize my taskbar to be just a little bit smaller. I'll go back into Settings and Taskbar, and I'll turn off the Auto Hide. So you can see there are a number of features to adjusting the taskbar, and it really can be configured to how the user best wants to use the user interface and use that taskbar to run multiple applications. At this point, I'm going to minimize Microsoft Excel so that it's down at the bottom of my taskbar. Another new feature of Windows 95 is what we call shortcuts. There are a number of shortcuts here on my desktop that you can see here. I'm going to actually go to a shortcut that I have currently on my desktop. This is the Microsoft Project application. Now the shortcut exists on my desktop, but it actually points to the project.exe file located in another subdirectory. So when I double click on that particular shortcut, it automatically runs that project program. Now, shortcuts are very flexible. They can exist both on the desktop, as you see here. They could actually be in a folder, and I'll pull up my computer so we can see some of the folders we have listed. If I open up my C drive, you'll notice there's a number of applications listed here. I also have a shortcut listed here on the C:\root directory. This is a shortcut to a program called Monitor. Once again, they can exist in a subfolder on your desktop just about anywhere. Now, a shortcut does not have to point to an exe file. Let me close out the C:\my computer screen you're showing here. A shortcut could actually exist to just a typical text file. In this case, we have two folders, two icons or shortcuts that point to actual files that exist on the hard drive. This is a WinNews file that's going to be on by default with Windows 95. If I were to right or secondary mouse click on this particular shortcut, it will bring up a menu. This is known as the context menu. If I were to then use properties for that particular shortcut, it'll tell me a little bit about what this link is, where it points to, what's the target file. First of all, I get an idea of what the name of it is, in this case Microsoft WinNews. I see a MS-DOS name. This is a compatible 8.3 name. I see when it was created, when it was modified, what kind of attributes it has. If I were to choose the shortcut property page, it actually tells me who the target location is and who the target actually is. In this case, it's C:\Windows winnews.txt. So it's pointing to a text file. Let me go ahead and choose Cancel on this option. You'll notice when I double click on this particular shortcut, it will automatically start the Notepad program and open winnews.txt. This is because the TXT extension is associated with the Notepad program. Therefore, it automatically knows to start Notepad and show me that particular file in Notepad itself. Another feature of these shortcuts is that they can point to other targets as well. And Windows 95 will keep track of what the target is. For example, in this case, I've got a file. We pointed to the winnews.txt file in my Windows directory. Let's go to my computer, and I'm going to find this particular file in the C drive under the Windows directory. I'll scroll down on my screen just a little bit to find that file. And here you'll see the winnews.txt icon. Now, if I were to happen to decide to want to move this file, I would just drag and drop it to a new place. In this case, I'll just drag it directly to my desktop. That moves it out of the Windows directory and into my desktop directory. Now, as I close the Windows directory, you'll notice I now have an actual winnews.txt. Also notice there's no arrow in the bottom left corner of that icon to indicate it's a shortcut. So that's how we know it's the actual file. Another way to tell is, again, to secondary mouse click on that particular icon and choose Properties from the context menu. In this case, I just have a General tab and do not have a Shortcut tab, so we know that it is in an actual file rather than a shortcut. Once again, I'll choose Cancel. Now that I no longer have the actual text file located in my Windows directory, my shortcut to that file is no longer going to be correct. It still thinks that file exists there. A nice feature about Windows 95 user interface is that I can double click on it and it will immediately go try and find that particular file if possible. In this case, it wasn't able to find it, so I will right click, choose Properties, and then go to the shortcut menu and point it to the correct directory. Notice I also have a Find Target button here as well, and it will try and find that particular application. Basically what it's doing is looking for any type of reference that we may be able to use to point to that file. In this case, it's unable to find it, so I'll need to manually type in where it's located now. I've typed in the path and the correct file name, and I'll choose Apply and OK. Now when I double click on Microsoft Windows, you see it again opens up Windows in the text file. So there's some flexibility in here, and it also, Windows 95 will try and correct for any problems that you may have. For example, if you delete a file or if you move it to another subdirectory, the shortcut will try and keep track of that. Another nice feature of shortcuts is that I can use shortcuts to access files and folders on a network computer. In this example, I'm going to go to my network neighborhood, and you can see it shows all of the computers out there. I'll double click on the NT server, and I'll double click. You'll see I've got an access to the C drive. At this point, I could create a shortcut to that C drive on the other computer. I will right click on it and choose Create Shortcut. It tells me it can't create a shortcut on the other computer, but it can place it on my desktop, so I'll choose Yes. Now, if I were to close the NT server machine, you'll notice I've got a shortcut to C on NT server. If I double click on it, it automatically attaches to that computer, finds NT server, finds the C drive, and opens that up. A pretty handy feature for Windows 95. So you can see how shortcuts can be very flexible and useful in a networking environment. And you can actually create these shortcuts for your users. Another feature of the Windows 95 user interface that we've actually already demoed here a number of times is the secondary mouse click. The secondary mouse click gives you quick access to the most common commands inside the user interface. First, if I use the mouse to secondary mouse click on the actual desktop itself, you'll see I get a context menu that allows me to do a number of things. One is to arrange the icons. This will arrange any icons on my desktop. And there's a number of ways I can do it, by name, type, size, and date. Or I can just have it automatically arrange them for me. Let me arrange them by name. You can see it automatically sorts these icons by name for me. Again, I'll right click on the desktop, or secondary mouse click. Another option is to just line up these icons for me, and I can choose that as well. If I were to right click on the desktop, I can actually undo anything that I've done in the past, so it keeps track of my previous movements and allows me to change those when necessary. We've already talked about the New button. It allows me to create a new shortcut or a new folder. I can also create or begin to create a new sound, a text image, or bitmap, or a new briefcase file from any of these options. So you can see right-clicking on the desktop brings up a number of features. The final one is perhaps one of the most beneficial, and that's the Properties page for the desktop. Here, if I choose Properties, it brings up the display properties for my screen. Here's where you can change the background or the screensaver. You can change the appearance, the colors that are used, the type of font that's used in Windows 95, and also the settings for your desktop, such as 640 by 480 settings, 800 by 600 resolution, changing the colors. If I want to go from 256 back down to 16 colors, I can certainly do that here. And I can do all that very quickly just by right or secondary mouse clicking on the desktop and choosing Properties. I'll choose OK here for the selections that we made. I'm going to scroll my taskbar down just a little bit because I prefer it that way. At this point, you can also pretty much secondary mouse click on anything inside of Windows 95. First of all, I could secondary mouse click on any of the applications located in the taskbar. In this case, if I secondary mouse click on Excel, you can see I have some options here. I can restore, maximize, or close the application. I'll go ahead and restore it. You'll notice it opens up Excel at that point. That would be the same as double clicking. I'm going to go ahead and close down Excel at this point in time. Another feature is to secondary mouse click on the taskbar itself. If I were to do that, you'll see it gives me another menu that allows me to adjust the actual applications that are running. Let me open up these applications that I currently have running. I'll open up WordPad and I'll open up Project. Now you'll notice WordPad is currently under Project, and to see both of them at the same time, I would have to resize the screens of each one so that I could see both. Well, the taskbar can actually do this for me by secondary mouse clicking and choosing tile horizontally or tile vertically. In this case, I'll tile it horizontally. And you can see now I can see both Project and WordPad at the same time. Kind of a nice feature. Of course, if I don't like this, I can always cascade it So I can get to both of these applications fairly quickly just by choosing them in the user interface. Once again, remember the taskbar is always at the bottom that allows me to switch between applications when necessary. Another option for secondary mouse clicking on the taskbar is the Properties page. And here is where I can actually pull up properties for my taskbar. This was similar to when I hit Start Menu, Settings, and Taskbar. It actually pulls up the exact same display dialog box. So you can see there are a number of ways to do certain tasks within Windows 95. And this also will allow for ease of use and more flexibility for your users. I'll go ahead and cancel here. And I will minimize Project again and minimize WordPad. At this point, I can actually go into my computer and view some of my drives that exist currently on my computer. I've got a C drive. I've also got a D drive, which is my CD-ROM, as well as my floppy drive, my A drive. I can also right-click on these particular icons, and when I do, I have a number of options for a drive. First of all, I can just open it and view what's on that particular drive. I can also use the Find command, which we'll talk about in just a little while. If I wanted to share this drive, in this case I'm using the Microsoft Network peer-to-peer services, so I could actually share my drive just by using the secondary mouse button, choosing Share As. It's immediately going to share my root directory of my C drive. So I'll go ahead and choose OK. And now you'll notice a hand underneath my drive to indicate it's being shared. Rather than having to go into a file manager as used to in Windows for Workgroups 3.1, you just right-click and you can choose sharing. And you can see the speed here. Users who share something automatically will not have to go into File Manager to do that any longer. They can do it directly from my computer. Another option if you secondary mouse click on a drive is to some disk utilities and formatting. In this case, I could actually format my C drive. I don't actually want to format it, and when I try, Windows actually warns me it can't format this drive because it contains some files in use by Windows. But you can see how the benefit of actually, especially on a floppy drive, being able to actually format a floppy just by secondary mouse clicking and formatting. Another option by secondary mouse clicking on a drive letter is I can choose properties for that drive. This is a really nice feature of Windows 95 because when I choose properties, it actually gives me some options about my drive. You'll notice there's a nice graph that shows how much free space and how much used space exists on that current drive. It tells me the label, and it gives me some other property pages that I can use to manage this drive. Here I can go to Tools, for example, and could run a version of ScanDisk for Windows 95. I can use the backup program to go ahead and back up my C drive, or I could access the defrag program. All of these are available just by secondary mouse clicking on the drive letter. I'll cancel these for now. We'll talk a little bit about each one of these in just a moment. Now we've seen some of the properties you can bring up by secondary mouse clicking on a drive. We'll actually go to a shortcut so that you can see the properties there as well. Once again, I can see some of the actual functionality of a shortcut. Because this is a text file, I can actually send it quickly to my A drive. I can also send it out on the fax, or I can send it to my briefcase. We'll talk a little bit more about briefcase and sending to a floppy in just a moment. If I were to right-click and choose Properties for a shortcut, we've seen this dialog box before where you can choose the shortcut page, see who it's pointing to, see the actual file and text file it's actually talking to on the screen. At this point, I'll go ahead and cancel. And finally, we want to show you a secondary mouse click on an actual file. In this case, I've got the winnews.txt file actually located on my desktop here, and I will right-click or secondary mouse click on that. Once again, we have some of the same options we did for a shortcut. We can open it, we can print it directly from here, we can use the quick view to quickly open up that text file, we could send it to a floppy drive or a briefcase or to the fax. I can cut it from my desktop, or I could delete it from my desktop. I can also copy it, and then if I want to right-click and paste it somewhere else, I can certainly do that on another folder. And finally, I can choose the properties and see the general properties page for that particular file. Here it tells me when it was created, modified, and accessed. So you can see there are a number of key benefits to secondary mouse clicking on a variety of items within the Windows 95 user interface. You might want to use the Windows 95 tour or the help files to allow your users or yourself to be able to understand what will happen when you secondary mouse click, because it will vary from icon to icon to a component of Windows 95 user interface to another component. So try experimenting with that on your own time, playing with it and seeing what it does. You'll notice very quickly that it's going to allow you to quickly do things that took a much longer time under Windows 3.1. At this point, we're going to show you how you can still access some of your Windows 3.1 components, specifically the Program Manager and the File Manager. We let this option in, and it's actually an option you can choose during the setup process to automatically start Program Manager. This is really good for helping users who are having problems transitioning to the new user interface. They can still go back and use the old way that they were used to until they properly learn how to use Windows 95. In this case, I'm going to demonstrate some of the techniques you can use to get the Program Manager and File Manager running. On the screen, I'm actually going to go to the Start menu and choose the Run button. I'm going to run this because there isn't actually a shortcut to those two applications. So when I choose Run, I'll type in just the name of the Program Manager, which is actually called progman.exe. When I do that, you'll see that it automatically starts the Program Manager. And here's where I can view my old groups files. In this case, my Programs group, my Multimedia group. These were all groups that existed under my previous installation. Therefore, if I'm used to using the Program Manager in this way, I can still do that. I'll go ahead and close out Program Manager here. You'll see that Program Manager can be started in your startup group if necessary. You can place it into your Start menu, and therefore you're automatically starting it whenever Windows 95 begins. You can also may want to be able to use the old Windows 3.1 File Manager, and you do that the same way. Once again, I'll go to the Start menu and choose Run. On the command line, I'm going to tell it to open up winfile.exe because that's the name of the File Manager file on the hard drive. And here's my older Windows 3.1 File Manager. So if you're used to using that to manage your hard drive, you can still do that until you begin to understand how Windows 95 works. I'll go ahead and close out File Manager as well. Now, if I wanted to, I could also create a shortcut here on my desktop to both of those applications so that I could quickly just double-click on them to run them. And then when I'm ready to move away from File Manager and Program Manager to Windows 95, I'll just delete them off my desktop. Another new feature of the Windows 95 user interface is what we call the Recycle Bin. The Recycle Bin keeps track of any deleted programs that you removed either in the Explorer or in the Windows 95 user interface. It's very similar to the Undelete program that was added with MS-DOS 6.0 and above. In this case, the Recycle Bin is located on your desktop, and I'll show you how you can maneuver around the Recycle Bin. Here we have the Recycle Bin listed as an icon, and when I double-click on it, you'll see that there's currently no files listed in my Recycle Bin. What it does is keep track of any current existing deleted files so that I can undelete them at any point in time. Let me delete a file real quickly here. I'll go to that Microsoft Windows that I've copied to my desktop, and I'll choose Delete. It asks me, are you sure you want to send Microsoft Windows to the Recycle Bin? And it's always going to say that by default whenever you delete a file from the user interface. I'll say yes, and you'll notice now that icon is in my Recycle Bin. If later I decided that I do not want to delete it, I could always go back to my Recycle Bin and choose File and either empty it to actually delete that file, or I could right-click on the particular file and choose Restore. And that will place it back on my desktop once again, back into its original location. So it's a good way to save files that you've accidentally deleted or that you decide in the future you no longer want to delete. A couple of configuration options for the Recycle Bin include being able to configure it for a specific drive if necessary. And I'll do that by choosing Properties for the Recycle Bin. Here I can configure the drives independently, or I can use one setting for all my drives. In this case, I really only have one hard drive that I can delete files off of, and that would be my C drive. You can also specify how large the Recycle Bin is in relation to the rest of your hard drive. This is so it's not taking up all of your free disk space. The default is 10%, and using the 10% number, that still means you will have quite a bit of extra space left over on your hard drive, hopefully, and only 10% being used possibly for the recycle bin. Now remember, that's a maximum that will be used. Another option here is to display the delete confirmation dialog box. If you want to delete a file and you don't want to verify that yes, you do want to delete it, then you can deselect this particular option, and now when I delete a file, it will immediately send it to the recycle bin. Another option in the recycle bin is to let you know, by looking at the C drive, the size of the drive and how much is reserved for the recycle bin. In this case, 10% of a 510 meg drive is 51 megs. And of course, at any point in time, if I have files deleted, and I'll delete another file just to send it to my recycle bin, I can choose File and Empty Recycle Bin, and it will delete that file completely from my hard drive. Once you do that, there's no way to recover. One final thought with Recycle Bin is that if you use an older 16-bit application, something like File Manager or perhaps MS-DOS to delete a file, it will not go to the recycle bin. So this will be something that 32-bit applications will take advantage of, as well as the Windows 95 user interface. Now we're going to take a look at some of the key components you can use to configure Windows 95. Probably the main key component that you'll want to be using is known as the Device Manager. Here's where you can control the hardware device drivers that are being used by Windows 95. To access the Device Manager, we'll go to the 486 machine. And now I have Control Panel open. I'll choose the System icon here in Control Panel. Once I open up the System Properties dialog box, there's a Device Manager tab that I can select. You'll see when we first come into Device Manager, it shows all of your existing devices by the type. In this case, there's a number of hard disk controllers it shows. It shows my mouse, any monitors, any modems, whatever you may have installed by device listed here. Now if I wanted to view that differently, I could view it by connection. And here you see what's connected to specific devices. In this case, what's connected to my SCSI controller? Well, I have an NEC CD-ROM. I also have a hard drive, both connected to that SCSI controller. So you can break it down in two different ways. While in the Device Manager, you can take a look at a number of key components. First of all, you can actually look at the resources being used by a device. I'm going to open up the network adapters type and choose my Etherlink 3 network adapter, and then choose Properties. Here I have a number of pages that I can use here. The first is the General page. This tells me the device type, the manufacturer, and the hardware version if possible. It'll also tell me the device status listed here. Currently this device is working properly, and it lets me know that. If I was having trouble using that device, that driver wasn't loading properly, it would let me know that as well. It would say something like, this device is not working properly. If I wanted to disable this device, I could move down to Device Usage and uncheck that from my configuration. However, please note that when doing this, this only means that the protected mode Windows 95 device driver is being unloaded. That doesn't necessarily mean you won't be able to use that device, only that it will be using slower real mode drivers or having to go to real mode every time you access that device. In this case, I'm going to turn that back on because we definitely want to use the Microsoft drivers because they're definitely going to be faster than using a real mode driver. The other tab is the Resources tab, and here is where it tells you what resources are currently being used by this device. In this case, it's using an I/O range of 300 to 30F hex. It's using an interrupt request of 10. If I wanted to change what resources this device was using, I could choose the Set Configuration manually and choose Change Setting on whichever option I wanted to change. Here I could change the I/O address to a different I/O address. One of the nice things when changing the address is that it tells you if there's a conflict, if you're setting it to something that conflicts in your device. Right now, most of these I/O addresses say no devices are conflicting. However, now I've selected an option that says it's conflicting with the ECP printer port. So I definitely want to avoid doing that as well. I'll set it back to its original configuration at this time. Now, if this is a plug-and-play device, you will actually be changing the resources used by that device. However, if this is a device that has to be manually configured, just changing it here is only telling Windows 95 what resources that device is using. It's not necessarily changing the physical hardware of that device. You may still have to use some other utility or to open up your machine and configure it that way. Once again, the benefit of plug and play here will be that they'll automatically configure themselves, and you should never have to worry about changing them to avoid conflicts. The final thing in Device Manager that we'd like to show you is the actual computer itself. And there's an option here when you highlight Computer to choose Properties. It tells you a little bit about what resources are currently in use. You'll see here that it tells me, first of all, what interrupt requests or IRQ lines are currently being used by what devices. So this is a good way for you to get quick information about what devices are using what IRQs and is there a possible conflict. In this example, you'll see that there are a couple of examples. We've got COM3 and COM1 both sharing IRQ4. And down at the bottom, we've got our PCI to IDE controller and the primary IDE controller drivers both sharing IRQ14. So that's a good way for you to start to see where the conflicts may exist. Now I can do that for IRQ. Can also show my I/O addresses, and you'll be able to see what devices are located where and what's free, what you can use to configure your devices. You can also see the DMA, the direct memory access channels. Currently we have 2, 4, and 5 in use. And you can see the memory. This is the RAM address that's used in the upper memory of your 1 meg conventional scheme. So once again, this is a good way to see your current resources that are being used. Finally, you have the option to print. And here in this option, you'll actually be able to print out a summary of all of your devices onto, you can actually print it to a file or print it to your actual printer. And that way you'll be able to keep track of what devices are being used where. You might want to go through and print a Device Manager report for all of your computers in your organization. That way you can keep track of what changes need to be made, and you might be able to better be able to install new hardware in the future by using Device Manager. At this point, I'll go ahead and cancel the print box and cancel out of Device Manager. The next feature is also available here in Control Panel, and that's the Add Remove Programs button. Here there's 3 different options we can do here with Add Remove Programs. I'll go in and double click on that here in Control Panel. The first option is to uninstall or install applications. Here's where you can install a new program, either from disk or from CD-ROM. If I were to choose the Install button, it then brings up a wizard that asks me, do I want to continue? And I'll choose Next. And asks me where to look for the particular application. What it's looking for here is a Setup EXE program, a Windows setup program. Once I choose OK here, it'll go ahead and run the Setup EXE program and install the application for me. I'm going to go ahead and choose Cancel here on the screen. Another nice new feature is once I've installed a program in this manner, I can actually remove it. And this means it will not only remove the program and all of its files, but it'll also remove any changes it made to your registry. One key thing to note about this is that this will only apply to new Windows 95 applications. If you install an older Windows 3.1 application, you can use the uninstall feature. However, it may only delete the files. It will not change all the current configuration settings. So you want the application to be able to take advantage. It should be a Windows 95 app. The second part of this dialog box that you'll see is the Windows Setup dialog box. Here is where you can actually change the configuration of what components Windows 95 has installed. Now, when we did the setup on this machine, we selected all devices. Let's say I decided I no longer wanted to use Microsoft Fax. I could just deselect that checkbox and choose Apply. Windows 95 will automatically remove all the fax components from my system. It's also going to update my shortcuts so that fax is no longer an option available within my Start menu. So you can see it's very easy if you need to free up disk space to come in and remove unnecessary components. In the same way, you can add components. You can come back in and select any components you did not install during the setup process. The third option on this property page that I can choose is to create the startup disk. I do that by moving to the Startup Disk tab and selecting that. Here you have the option to create a disk. And it notes here if you have trouble starting Windows, you can use a startup disk to start your computer and run diagnostic programs. I would use the Create Disk button to go ahead and create a startup disk. Because I've already done one during setup, I don't need to do one right now, so I'll choose Cancel. Another new feature of Windows 95 is the drive space utility. And you can use this to create more drive space on your hard drive. This is very similar to the MS-DOS 6.0 and 6.2 version of drive space. However, this is protected mode version, so it'll move much faster. I'm going to show you here on the 486 how to use the drive space utility. To get to it, you'll actually need to go to the Start menu. So I'll move my mouse to the Start button now, and then choose Programs. It'll be located under Accessories, and then under System Tools under Accessories. Finally, I can choose the drive space option. This brings up a graphical dialog box that allows me to configure drive space. It currently shows me any existing drives as well as compressed drives that I may have. Right now I just have my physical C drive and my floppy. If I wanted to compress a drive, I would just move to the Drive menu and choose Compress. Windows 95 will give you a graphic that explains how much drive space you have now. In this case, I have about 325 megabytes free. And then it shows my drive after compression. Therefore, I have a number of options that I can use to do this. If I were to go ahead and start, it would need to actually do a scan disk on my computer and then actually reboot the machine. And in our demo right now, I'm going to choose Close at this point. If you wanted to create a new drive from uncompressed space and not actually compress any data, you would go to the Advanced option and choose Create Empty. Again, here I could use free available space on any drive and then choose how much I wanted to use. In this case, it defaults to all. I'll just change it to 20 megabytes. Then if I were to hit Start, it would create a compressed 20 megabyte drive from the existing available space on my C drive. Once again, you can see here that this will not have to reboot the computer. However, it will run ScanDisk for you at this point. I'm going to go ahead and hit Cancel here as well. There are a number of other options available that allow you to manage your drive space drives. You can adjust the free space. You can go ahead and uncompress it after you've already compressed it. And if you don't want to currently mount a particular compressed drive so that it's not available for your users, you can leave it unmounted until you get to the point that you want to use that drive, and then you mount that drive. If you wanted to change the drive letter currently being used, you can also use that as well. Since we don't have one, it's going to give me an error letting me know that I can't change the drive letter of an uncompressed drive. So you can see drive space is going to give you about the same compression that you had under MS-DOS. However, it should be moving much faster because we don't have to go down to real mode to read the uncompressed or read the compressed drive. The next available option inside of Windows 95 is the ScanDisk component. And again, this is going to be very similar to the ScanDisk available in MS-DOS. However, this one does have a few changes. First of all, it's built into Windows 95 and it's a Windows version rather than a DOS version. Also, it is long file name aware. It understands the Windows 95 long file names and won't destroy them if it detects an existing long file name. It can also correct any problems with your current long file names. Now, if you are running in real mode, you can still run the DOS version of ScanDisk and it will be long file name aware. However, it won't be able to fix them. You'll need to run the Windows 95 version to fix those. I'm going to demonstrate showing you ScanDisk here on the computer again. Let me close out the drive space utility, and I'll choose my computer. The best way to choose ScanDisk is to open up a drive letter that you want to run ScanDisk upon, in this case my C drive, and I will use the secondary mouse button to get to the Properties sheet for that drive. At the top of the Properties page, I have a Tools page that I can choose, and the error checking status. This is the version of ScanDisk. I'll go ahead and choose Check Now. Type of test. The standard will generally check all files and folders for any type of lost allocation units, perhaps sector problems. So I'll go ahead and start that here. You'll see there's a taskbar to identify how long ScanDisk will take, and it's indicating it's checking folders currently. At that point, it brings up a results dialog box to let me know what it found. In this case, there were no bad sectors. There were a couple hidden files, a couple user files. Didn't have any problems really on the hard drive, and it let me know that. So I'll go ahead and choose Close. At that point, I could go ahead and do a more thorough check where I do a surface scan, or I could close it out at this point as well. Another option in this same dialog box on Properties is what we call the defrag, or Microsoft defrag. In this case, it's the last option here on the Properties page for your drive letter. It says Defragment Now. The defrag works very similar to the MS-DOS-based defrag as well. It checks your hard drive for lost clusters, files that have been separated across your hard drive and combines them into one area on your hard drive. This makes disk access much better. I'll go ahead and choose defragment now, and it lets me know, first of all, by checking to see how fragmented it really is. In this case, it says it's 0% fragmented, and you don't really need to defrag this drive now. If you want to do it anyway, click Start, which is what I'll do here. The default is to just show you a progress bar and show you how far it's going at the current time. In this case, 4 to 5%. If I choose the Show Details button, you'll see I get more details to how it checks my drive. And if you've used the MS-DOS-based scan disk before, or the MS-DOS-based defrag, you'll notice that this looks very similar. You can see as it's moving files across your hard drive, it's replacing them, and it's letting you know as it does each one. In this case, I can go ahead and choose Hide Details, and it again goes back to just the progress bar. At any point in time, I can pause defrag. Now, one thing to note about defragmentation, when defragging a drive, the Windows version of defrag requires that no other access to that drive be made. This means if I were to open a file on that drive, defrag wouldn't know exactly what to do because files have been moved around possibly. In this case, what defrag will do is it'll start over again. So it'll get up to that point where it's defragged and just begin defragmentation again. So you can continue to work on your machine while defrag is running. However, please note if you're working on the same drive that's being defragged, it may take a bit more time because it's having to start over each time you access the hard drive. On the screen, we're going to go ahead and stop defragmentation, and you can just stop it at any point in time. At this point in time, we've showed you some of the tools and utilities that can be used inside of Windows 95. We've showed you the device manager and how you can use that to see your resources, to control the protected mode drivers used by Windows 95. We've also looked at some of the disk utilities such as ScanDisk and defrag and drive space, and how they can help you and benefit your speed and your performance of your hard drive. At this point, we've looked at some of the utilities you can use to manage your hard drive. We've looked at the ScanDisk program for Windows 95. We've looked at how you can defrag your drive with the defragmentation program. And we've also looked at drive space for Windows 95 and how you can use that to manage compression on your hard drive. We've also looked at a number of the tools that you can use under Windows 95 to manage your key components. We've looked at the device manager and how you can use that to control your protected mode drivers. We've also looked at some of the components that allow you to manage, for example, some of your utilities, such as the taskbar to control your applications. We looked at the Start button. We've looked at shortcuts and how they work with the user interface. All of these allow you to manage your Windows 3.1 task better and faster. So we've seen the performance benefits that you have here in the Windows 95 user interface.
Thank you, Johnny. It's very clear that the user interface has really changed. Since today's show is focused on migration, what kind of transition aids has Microsoft provided to help both new users and users of previous versions of Windows to become productive quickly in the Windows 95 user interface?
We've actually provided a number of tools that you can use in order to give you an idea of how to use the Windows 95 user interface. There are also a number of documentation resources out there available for you. I'm going to demonstrate one tool that you can quickly use to help you get an idea about using the interface. First of all, I'm going to go down to the taskbar and choose the Start button. And within the Start button, I'm going to choose the Help option. Help is great within Windows 95 at giving you information about walking you through how to use Windows 95. And perhaps the best is the 10-minute to using Windows demo. I'll double click on that now so that you'll be able to see that. You'll see it's got a nice interface. And what this does, it allows you to walk through some of the common steps. For example, starting a program, maybe exploring your hard drive with Windows 95, finding a file, and managing multiple applications, switching windows. So you can see there are a number of options available in this tour, and it takes you on a step-by-step process of how to do that. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of there and throw the questions back to you, Elliot.
Okay, but Johnny, why don't you stay up there for 1 second? We had a call recently from Larry in Atlanta, and he would like to see other functions that you can bring up with that right mouse click. That's assuming that you've configured so your primary one is the left. What does the right click do on things like the network neighborhood?
Okay, let me go ahead and show you some of that. I'll use the network neighborhood to to move across and choose my secondary mouse button, in this case my right mouse button. You'll see I have a number of options available here as well. One of the nice ones is I could choose Properties, which brings up my network configuration dialog box. Here's where we added clients and protocols and adapters, so I can do that here as well. Another right mouse click function is to go ahead and to connect or map a network drive. So I can immediately, if I know this path and the share name, type that in here as well. Or I could disconnect from right-clicking on Network Neighborhood as well. So you see there are a number of options, and it's really going to vary depending on what you're choosing. Is it a shortcut? Is it a built-in application? There's lots of options with Windows 95 that you can use there, Elliot.
Okay, thank you very much, Johnny. Dilip, well, you know, in a kind of responsive television mode like this, there is an opportunity for immediate request for clarification. And after your statement earlier on the show about some of the ways in which NT Workstation has same or different functionalities for Windows 95, Terry from Cleveland called up, and his question was, why do we need to go to Win95 if the NT Workstation has the same functionality and will in the near future incorporate the Windows 95 user interface? Can you add some clarity to that?
That is a good question. While I mentioned earlier on that they were both 32-bit operating systems, they both supported multitasking. One of the commitments we made with Windows 95 was that it would work on your existing hardware. And that means all your 386DX machines with 4 megabytes of RAM. That's something that Windows NT does not guarantee at this point. And so if you want your existing real mode drivers to work, or if you want any full backward compatibility with your existing 16-bit applications, then we recommend that you stay with Windows 95. But you're right, they're both operating systems that somebody could use if they have the hardware for it.
Great. Okay, Johnny, over to you. And we're going to try to go through a couple of these real quickly because we've had a large number of viewer questions. Bill from Gresham, Oregon would like to know what uses are there for a RAM drive in Windows 95? When would he use it?
Well, a RAM drive typically would be used if you need extra space, and it's stored in memory, so really on a temporary basis needing that extra memory. Within Windows 95, you know, if you do need a RAM drive, it would only be for minor applications or just temporary storage.
Dilip, John from Phoenix, obviously is in a very server-rich environment, wants to know, does Windows 95 have the same kind of network limitations in terms of the number of incoming servers as the NT Workstation does?
Oh, like the 10 workstation limit? Right. Not at this point. The product at this point is still in beta, so I don't want to go up and say it will not be changed, but at this point we don't have the same limitations. Okay.
Well, what we'd like to do is, once again, we have a live call from Mark in area code 616. Mark, where is 616?
It's by Cadillac, Michigan.
Okay, Cadillac, Michigan. What's your question? You want to know something about user and GDI heap resource limitations?
Yes, I was wondering what had been done to eliminate the limits with the GDI heap that you find in Windows 3.x series.
That's a very good question, Mark. We actually have implemented much of the system resources. Your typical handles and such that are used for user and GDI are now in 32-bit code, which means we can have a lot more information stored there. Therefore, you probably will not run into the same limits that you had in Windows 3.1 as far as resources. Your only limitation will be how much memory you have.
Mark, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it would be good to see that you don't run into those limitations any longer.
Definitely.
Okay, and thanks for hanging in there throughout the show.
Thank you.
Okay, now, Dilip, here's a question you and I have talked about a lot, which is the training issue. And Steve from Huntington, West Virginia, wants to know that with an interface that's so different than what he's currently using, how long will it take him to retrain his users?
Well, that's a question we've been asked a lot. We did a lot of usability studies with the product before we even got it to this stage, and we found that the product is sort of self-teaching. So beginning users can get productive very, very early with Windows 95. In fact, in some studies that we've done, we found that people are productive about 9 times faster than they are with Windows 3.1 today. So while the interface is different, it's so simple that people should not have to go through major retraining to be able to understand and learn it. But I've said this before, I think it really is never too early to start planning the whole migration process.
Right. And just to echo that, at the Mazie Center, we've been doing a fair amount of studies in this area. And what we find is that probably starting with a briefing for users to get them used to the product while you're going to, maybe then going to the demo, and then using your training resources very strategically in that set. Right. Nadine has a question, which once again back to you as a manager in the area. When will the applications be available to take full advantages of Windows 95?
Actually, we've had a lot of interest from our ISV partners on this issue. We found out that pretty much all major applications will be ready to ship within 30 days of launch of Windows 95. And we've got over 1,000 ISVs at the moment ready and willing to, and they're working on Windows 95 applications. So definitely they'll be out as soon as the product's ready and done.
Time probably for one more question from Celeste from Denver, Colorado. Celeste has an older application that installs a .386 device driver into their system INI. Since Windows 95 uses VXD files in the registry, do they need to manually add this file?
Actually, they will not. That's a very good question. With the 386 files, that was just a name we gave to our virtual drivers in Windows 3.1. Now that 386 has become less commonplace, we've got 486s and Pentiums that these drivers can be used on. We've given it a .vxd extension, but they're still pretty much the same. So you can still load a 386 driver in your system ini, and as long as it doesn't conflict with an existing driver that Windows 95 loaded, Windows 95 will go ahead and load that .386 file for that application.
Well, we're just about out of time for questions, but if you each had to say one phrase that would summarize what you think our viewers should be thinking about in terms of getting ready for Windows 95?
Watch Traincast, be ready, here it comes. It's a cool product.
Yeah, learn the product. Get as much information as you can. Go out there and buy as many books as you can, watch as many shows, and learn as much as you can about the product before it actually ships.
It's a resource-rich, at times complex product, but it's going to be their role as frontline IS professionals to make it simpler for the user community.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Well, thank you very much. We are out of time for today, and we'll close down our Traincast question and answer line. And I want to thank Johnny and Dilip, and also the folks here at Microsoft Studios and the support engineers that have been online to answer and take some of your questions. Over the past decade, the PC industry has delivered innovative, cost-effective products that have made the personal computer a widely used tool both in the office and in the home. The development of Windows 95 has been guided by the primary principle that all technological improvements must translate into practical benefits for users, and these benefits must be easily and inexpensively available to everyone. Windows 95 aims to make the upgrade and transition easy, without pain and without loss of performance or capability. The Traincast series is designed in that same spirit. It is more than an opportunity for you to get insight into a new and exciting product. It is a joint learning opportunity. As such, we want feedback on how well this series is meeting your learning needs. So please send us your feedback at mstv@microsoft.com as internet mail. You can also call 800-597-3200 for more information. On a personal note, as a training professional and as your guide for this program, I'm interested in hearing from you, both about this series but also your experiences with the training and learning process. And I can be reached at 1-800-95-MAZY. In our next show, we will focus on the technical specifics for how to configure Windows 95 on the enterprise. Autumn Womack is here to give us a brief overview.
In our next Traincast session, we're going to learn the new networking features of Windows 95. This session can be broadly partitioned into 4 segments. In the first section, I will cover details on the architecture of the network operating system and plug-and-play functionality. The second section will drill down into client configurations for Microsoft networks such as Windows NT and Windows for Workgroups using NetBEUI, IPX, and TCP/IP protocols. In the third section, we will focus on the user-level pass-through security model and how enterprises can implement this. And finally, we will discuss peer-to-peer services, including directory and print sharing and the new point-and-print installation feature. So don't forget, there'll be plenty of demonstrations This show is what network management of Windows 95 is all about.
I'm looking forward to learning all about that in our next show. Thank you again for joining us, and good day from Microsoft Studios in Redmond, Washington.
Thank you for joining us today for Microsoft's Windows 95 Traincast. Microsoft TV programming is designed to bring you timely and in-depth technical information. How are we doing? We're very interested in hearing from you. Please send us your comments and suggestions at mstv@microsoft.com. For a complete and free listing of all Microsoft TV programs, please call 800-597-3200 between 6:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. Pacific, or send electronic mail to mstv@microsoft.com. If you'd like to subscribe to our electronic Windows 95 newsletter, WinNews, send internet email to enews@microsoft.nwnet.com with the words "Subscribe WinNews" as the only text in your message. WinNews file sections can also be found on most major online services and networks. To order a videotape of today's show, call 800-597-3200.